Chapter 1. Cheng Yin felt someone calling him. Your Highness, wake up. He turned his head, but the voice did not disappear. Instead, it grew louder. He felt someone reach out and gently tug at his sleeve. Your Highness, Your Highness. Cheng Yin opened his eyes abruptly. The familiar screen was gone, the office desk was gone, and the walls that were plastered with paper slips were also gone. In their place was a strange scene. A low brick building, a circular square that was crowded with people, and a gallows that was erected in the middle of the square. He sat on the high platform opposite the square. Instead of a soft swivel chair, he sat on a cold, hard iron chair. There was a circle of people sitting around him, staring at him. Among them, a few women dressed like medieval ladies were covering their mouths and laughing. What the hell is this place? Shouldn't I be working on the blueprint? Cheng Yan's mind was blank. 3 consecutive days of overtime had pushed his body and mind to the limit. He could only remember that he could not take it anymore. His heart was racing, and he wanted to rest on the desk for a while. Your Highness, please announce the verdict. The person who spoke was the guy who was tugging at his sleeve. He looked old, about 50 or 60 years old, and he wore a white robe. At first glance, he looked like Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. Am I dreaming? Cheng Yin licked his dry lips. Verdict? What verdict? But he soon found out. The people in the square were all looking in the direction of the gallows, waving their fists and shouting. Occasionally, 1 or 2 stones would be thrown towards the gallows. Cheng Yin had only seen such an ancient torture device in the movies. The 2 sides of the gallows were about 4 meters tall, and the top of the pillars was supported by a wooden beam. In the middle of the beam was a rusty iron ring, and a yellowish hemp rope was threaded through the iron ring. One end was fixed under the gallows, and the other end was looped around the prisoner's neck. In this strange dream, he found that his eyesight had become surprisingly good. Usually without glasses, he would not be able to see the words on the screen, but now, he could see every detail on the scaffold that was 50 meters away. The prisoner was wearing a hood, and her hands were tied behind her back. Her coarse gray shirt was as dirty as a rag. She was thin, and her ankles looked like they could be broken with a pinch. Her chest was slightly bulging, and it seemed that she was a woman. She shivered in the wind, but still managed to stand straight. All right, what crime did this fellow commit that caused so many people to wait for her to be hanged with righteous indignation? Just as he thought of this, Cheng Yan's memory seemed to have been connected, and the answer appeared before his eyes almost at the same time. She was a witch. She was tempted by the devil and fell into depravity, the embodiment of impurity. Your Highness, Gandalf urged cautiously. He glanced at the other party. Well, it turns out that his name is not Gandalf. Bearav is his real name. He is the assistant of the Minister of Finance. He was sent to deal with government affairs for me. As for himself, he was the 4th Prince of Grey Castle Kingdom, Roland. He was here to guard this place. When the residents of Border Town caught a witch, they would immediately send her to the police station. No, to the Court of Justice. The warrant for the execution of a witch was generally issued by the local lord or the bishop. Since he was in power here, issuing the warrant was also part of his duty. His memory presented the questions that he most needed answers to. He did not need to filter them or read them. It was as if he had experienced it himself. Cheng Yin was confused for a moment. No dream could be so detailed. So was this not a dream? Did he travel to the dark ages of the Middle Ages in Europe and become Roland? From a drawing dog who worked overnight to become the 4th prince? Although this territory of the kingdom seemed so barren and backward, he had never seen the name Grey Castle Kingdom in history books. So what should he do next? How such an unscientific thing like time travel actually happened could be researched later, but the farce in front of him had to stop. It was normal for an uncivilized civilization to blame disasters and misfortunes on some poor souls, but to hang them to satisfy the dark psychology of the onlookers. This kind of stupidity was unacceptable to Luo Yan. He grabbed the warrant that Bearav was holding and threw it to the ground. He stretched and said, I'm sleepy. I'll pass the sentence another day. Today everyone is dismissed. Cheng Yin was not acting recklessly. He was carefully recalling the way the prince behaved in his memory and reproducing the style of a spoiled brat. Yes, Prince Roland was such a jerk. He had a bad character, and did whatever he wanted. Then again, how could an unruly prince in his early 20s be so well-mannered? The other nobles sitting on the platform did not seem surprised. Instead, a tall man in armor stood up and said, "Your Highness, this is not a joke. Once a witch's identity is confirmed, she should be executed immediately. What if other witches come to kidnap her? The church will not sit back and do nothing if they find out." Carter Lannis, this decent-looking man, was actually his chief knight. Cheng Yin frowned and said, "Why are you afraid?" The naked mockery in his words was not entirely an act. A strong man whose arms were thicker than the other party's body was actually worried about being rescued by the other party. Did he really think that the witch was the devil's advocate? Wouldn't it be better to have a few more of them? Seeing that he did not say anything, Cheng Yin waved his hand and asked the guards to take him away. Carter hesitated for a moment, but he still followed the group and walked beside Prince Roland. The other nobles stood up and bowed to show their respect, but Cheng Yin could see the undisguised contempt in their eyes from the corner of his eyes. When he returned to the palace, which was located in the castle south of Border Town, he ordered the guards to stop the anxious assistant minister outside the hall. Only then did he feel a little relieved. As a person who spent 90% of his time dealing with computers, it was already an extraordinary performance to be able to put on such a show in front of so many people. Cheng Yin found his bedroom according to his memory, sat on the bed, and rested for a while before he suppressed his violent heartbeat. The most important thing now was to figure out the situation. As a prince, why did he come to this desolate land instead of staying in King's City? It would have been better if he did not think about it, but as soon as the idea came to him, he was shocked by the answer. Roland Wimbledon actually came to fight for the throne. The origin of everything came from the strange decree of the King of Grey Castle, Wimbledon III. If one wanted to inherit the kingdom, it was not the prince who was born first who had the highest right, but the one who was most capable of governing the country. He sent his 5 adult children to various territories under his rule, and after 5 years, he would decide who would be the crown prince based on the level of governance. The one who was capable would be the one to rule, and the equality of men and women sounded very advanced. But the problem was that the actual implementation was completely different. Who could guarantee that all 5 people would have the same starting conditions? This was not a real-time strategy game. As far as he knew, the second prince's territory was much better than border towns. Well, in that case, among the 5 people, there seemed to be no place worse than Border Town, which was simply a bad start. In addition, how to evaluate the level of governance, population, military, economy? Wimbledon III did not mention any standards, nor did he put the slightest restrictions on the competition. What if someone secretly tried to assassinate him? What would happen then? Was the queen going to watch her sons kill each other? Wait. He carefully thought about it. Well, another bad news, the queen had passed away 5 years ago. Cheng Yin sighed. Obviously, this was a barbaric and dark feudal era, which could be seen from the wanton hunting of witches. Dressing up as a prince was already a very high starting point. Besides, even if he did not get the throne, he still had the blood of the King of Grey Castle. As long as he could survive, he would be granted a title and be considered a lord. And what could he do if he became the king? Without the internet, without the nourishment of modern civilization, he would also be like these natives, burning witches for fun, living in a city where feces were casually dumped, and finally dying from the ravaging Black Death? Cheng Yin suppressed his chaotic thoughts and walked to the full-length mirror in the bedroom. The person in the mirror had light gray curly hair, which was the most distinctive feature of the royal family of Grey Castle. His facial features were good, but his face was not proper, and he looked like he had no temperament. His face was slightly pale, indicating that he lacked exercise. As for whether he was addicted to wine and women, he recalled that he seemed to be fine. He had a few lovers in King's City, all of whom were voluntary, and he had never forced anyone. As for the reason for his time travel, Cheng Yin could roughly guess. It should be that the client inhumanely urged the progress, and the boss arranged for him to work overnight, which led to a sudden death. The protagonists of this kind of case were most likely code farmers, mechanical dogs, or engineering lions. No matter what, at least this was equivalent to an extra life, and he really should not complain too much. In the future, he might be able to slowly change this life, but at present, the most important task was to play the role of Prince Roland, and not let others find out that he was possessed by the devil and directly tied to the stake. Chapter 2. For the rest of the time, he locked himself in his room and recalled this world. His dinner was sent directly by the servants. With a strong desire to survive, Roland forcibly suppressed the fear and discomfort he felt towards the unfamiliar environment after he transmigrated to this world. He knew very well that the sooner he got more information, the lower the risk of being exposed. It had to be said that there was nothing else in Prince Roland's mind except for fooling around with a group of noblemen. Roland tossed and turned, but he could not recall any valuable information, such as the nobility's experience, the political situation, the diplomacy of neighboring countries, and so on. As for some basic knowledge, such as the name of the city and the year of the big event, he also could not connect it with his knowledge of European history. It seemed that this prince had absolutely no chance of becoming the king. Perhaps the king of Grey Castle also knew this, so he threw him to such a terrible place. Even if he did whatever he wanted, it would not cause too much damage. As for those brothers and sisters, Roland thought for a moment, and did not know whether to laugh or cry. The eldest brother was strong, the second brother was very insidious, the third sister was fierce, and the fifth sister was too smart. This was the impression that Prince Roland had left. What should he say? After more than 10 years of getting along, his final impression could be summed up in a few words. Which forces they had cultivated, who were their capable men, and what they were good at he did not know. It had only been 3 months since he came to Border Town, but the nobles here no longer concealed their contempt, which showed that Prince Roland was really not a leader. Fortunately, when he left King's City, Wimbledon III sent 2 people to help him, 1 civil and 1 military. Otherwise he would really be in the dark. Early the next morning, the maid Tyre repeatedly reminded Roland that the assistant minister wanted to see him. It seemed that he could not delay any longer. He touched the maid's buttocks according to his memory, and told her to inform Berev to wait in the living room. Seeing Tyre walk out of the door with a red face, Roland suddenly thought, since it was farming, would it come with a system or something? He yawned and silently called the system dozens of times in his mind, but nothing happened. Sure enough, novels are all lies. Berev, who was waiting in the living room, was already restless. As soon as he saw Roland, he came forward and asked, "Your Highness, why didn't you order the execution yesterday? It doesn't matter if it's 1 day earlier or 1 day later." Roland clapped his hands and ordered the servants to serve breakfast. "Sit down and talk slowly." It seemed to match the impression in his memory, he thought. The chief knight always liked to question him face to face when there was a problem, and the assistant minister would explain it to him in private. In any case, the loyalty of the 2 was reliable, although it was very likely for the sake of the king. A day late might attract other witches, Your Highness. This is different from the previous small matters. You can't act recklessly. Why are you saying this too? Roland asked with a frown. I thought you could tell the difference between rumors and facts. Berev looked confused. What rumor? Evil witches, the devil's emissaries, Roland said carelessly. Isn't that just the church's propaganda? I want them to stay out of this, but I think it's better to do the opposite. They say that witches are evil, but we don't hunt witches. We also want to tell the people of our territory that this is a shameless rumor spread by the church. Berev was stunned. But witches are they really evil? Roland asked. For example? The assistant minister was silent for a moment. He seemed to think that the prince was deliberately making fun of him. Your Highness, this issue can be discussed later. I know you don't like the church, but this kind of conflict will only backfire. It seems that changing the stereotype can't be done overnight. Roland curled his lips, but he didn't continue to care about this point. At this time, breakfast was placed on the table. There was a plate of fried bread, a plate of fried eggs, and a can of milk. He first poured a glass for the assistant minister, and pushed it in front of him. You haven't eaten yet? Let's talk while we eat. According to the maid, Bhairav had arrived at the summer palace at dawn, so he shouldn't have eaten yet. Although he decided to imitate the fourth prince's way of doing things, he still had to change it little by little. The assistant minister was a good target, he thought. Let your subordinates feel that you value them, so they will be more motivated to work for you. Subjective initiative is always the most efficient, isn't it? Bhairav took the glass but didn't drink it. He said anxiously, Your Highness, we have trouble. 3 days ago, the guards reported that they found a suspected witch's camp in the western forest. They left in a hurry and didn't clean up the traces. The guards found this in the camp. He took out a coin from his pocket and put it in front of Roland. It was not a common currency. At least in Roland's memory, he had never seen such a currency. It didn't even look like a metal product. Holding it in his hand, he was surprised to find that this thing was heating up. It was definitely not the residual heat from the assistant minister's body. The temperature was at least 40 degrees. At this moment, it reminded him of a heat pack. What is this? I thought it was just an evil thing made by a witch, but the situation is more serious than I thought. Bhairav wiped his forehead. The pattern on it is the Holy Mountain and the Magic Eye, which is the emblem of the Witch Cooperation Association. Roland rubbed the uneven surface of the coin, guessing that it was probably made of ceramic. The center of the coin was indeed engraved with a mountain pattern, 3 triangles juxtaposed with an eye in the center. The outline of the pattern was very rough. It should have been polished by hand. He recalled the words Holy Mountain and the Magic Eye, and Witch Cooperation Association. But he couldn't find any relevant information. It seems that the fourth prince added 0 points to the occult. Bhairav didn't expect Roland to know, so he continued. Your Highness, you haven't seen a real witch, so you don't think much of them. Indeed, they can be injured, they can bleed, and they are not more difficult to kill than ordinary people. But they can't resist. The life of a witch who receives the devil's call will become very short. But they will also gain terrible power that ordinary people can't match. Once a witch reaches adulthood, even the army will have to pay a heavy price. Their desire is almost impossible to suppress, and they will eventually degenerate into the devil's minions. Therefore, the church established the army of judges, and if a woman is found to be a witch, she can be arrested and executed. The king also agrees with this. And in fact, these measures are very effective. The number of cases of witches wreaking havoc is much less than 100 years ago. The legend of the Holy Mountain, or the Gates of Hell, came from the ancient books of that era. Roland chewed the bread, his heart sneering again and again. Although the background of this world was very different from what he knew, the historical development trajectory was still surprisingly similar. The church, it's the church again. He knew that religion is the devil's minions, the real source of evil. Once there is a sign, they will be executed. In the name of God, the law, arrest, trial, and execution are all in one body. This in itself is a kind of depravity. According to the ancient books, witches can only obtain true peace by going to the Holy Mountain. There is no magic backlash, nor will they be trapped by the skyrocketing desire. There is no doubt that the so-called Holy Mountain in the book is the birthplace of evil, the entrance to hell on earth. I think only hell will not punish these fallen people. What about the Witch Cooperation Association? What does it have to do with the Holy Mountain? Chapter 3. Roland swallowed the last piece of fried egg and wiped his mouth with a napkin. After saying so much, it turns out that you're worried that the Witch Cooperation Association will hear the news that she's not dead and come to save her. That's right, Your Highness, Bhairav said. They were in a hurry, so they should be on their way. If the witch was dead then it would be fine, but now she's still alive. Those lunatics even stole babies. I'm afraid they won't let go of a fallen companion. Roland was a little confused. He always felt that something was wrong. Why did the assistant minister and the chief knight feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy when they talked about witches? Was the woman who was going to be hanged a witch? She was so thin that it seemed like the wind would blow her away. If she had such terrible power, why would she stand there and let others trample her? No, she would never be caught. According to the church, she was the incarnation of the devil. In addition to the army of judges, the army of mortals would also pay a heavy price in front of witches. However, the devil was caught by the residents of Border Town and was tortured until she was sent to the gallows. That terrible power was nowhere to be seen. How was she caught? I heard that when the North Slope mine collapsed, she exposed her identity in order to escape, and was caught by the angry villagers. Roland thought for a moment. Well, he had an impression of this incident. It happened the day before he crossed over. How was she exposed? I'm not sure. The assistant minister shook his head. The situation was very chaotic. Someone should have seen her use witchcraft. Roland frowned. You didn't investigate this matter clearly? Your Highness, the restoration of production in the mine is a priority. The assistant minister protested. Half of Border Town's revenue depends on iron ore. And the prosecutor also confirmed that someone was killed by witchcraft at the scene. What kind of witchcraft? Roland became interested. As if melted, the head and most of the body were lying flat on the ground, reminding people of a burnt-out black candle. The other side said with a disgusted face, Your Highness, you don't want to see that kind of scene. Roland played with the silver fork in his hand, thinking. In history, most of the victims of witch hunts were innocent people. They were used as tools by the church and ignorant people to vent their anger, while a small number of them were the ones who courted death themselves. These people dressed themselves strangely and threw all kinds of strange ingredients into the pot all day long, claiming that they could predict the future and determine life and death. And they did figure out some tricks, such as using the flame reaction to claim that they had obtained the power of the gods. In the eyes of modern people, these were all chemical tricks, but back then, it was easily misinterpreted as an incredible phenomenon. As for melting people, the first thing that came to Roland's mind was chromic acid lotion. But it was troublesome to prepare. It required the human body to be completely soaked in water, and the effect of dissolving corpses was far worse than that of candles. As for other strong acids, it was even worse. So how did this witch do it? If she relied on alchemy, then she would be a rare chemist in the territory. If not, at this thought, Roland made up his mind. Take me to see her. Wait a minute, Your Highness. Are you going to see a witch? Bearov stood up in a panic, knocking over the glass of milk that he hadn't drunk. Yes, this is an order. Roland looked back at the assistant minister and smiled. He was now really grateful for the fourth prince's unreasonable style. When he walked to the door, he suddenly paused. Yes, I always wanted to ask, why was she hanged? What? Why was she hanged? Shouldn't all witches be burned at the stake? Bearov's face was full of confusion. Is that so? But she wasn't afraid of fire. Border Town only had one dungeon. The barren land couldn't afford to support too many prisoners. Most of the prisoners lived here for only a few days before facing trial. They were either released or executed. In addition to Bearov, the chief knight, the warden, the head of the prison, and 2 guards followed the prince into the dungeon. The dungeon had a total of 4 floors, and the walls were all made of hard granite. This was the first time that Roland had come to such a place. He noticed that the deeper he went, the narrower the passage became, and the number of cells was also decreasing. It was probably after digging a big hole in the shape of an inverted cone, and then piling up layers of stones, he thought. This kind of rough construction naturally didn't have good drainage measures, so the ground was very wet, and the muddy sewage flowed down the stairs. The witch was locked in the lowest floor of the dungeon, and with each floor, the stench in the air became stronger. Your Highness, what you are doing is too dangerous. Even if she is trapped by the god's locket of retribution, there is no guarantee of her safety. The one who spoke was Carter Lannis. The chief knight knew that the prince was going to visit the witch, and the first thing he did was to dissuade him. Moreover, the king's order was ineffective against him. He refused to accept any order that put the prince's life at risk, so he couldn't leave. Obviously, he has a cold and handsome face, but why is he so talkative? Roland really wanted to ask someone to sew his mouth up. If you don't dare to face evil, how can you have the courage to defeat evil? I thought you understood this. Even when fighting evil, you have to act according to your own strength. Recklessness doesn't equal bravery. In other words, If you meet an enemy weaker than yourself, you can uphold justice. But if you meet someone stronger than yourself, you should turn a blind eye. No, Your Highness, previously you were afraid of a witch breaking into the prison, and now you are afraid to meet a little girl. My chief knight is really unique. Although the knight was talkative, he was not good at arguing. So when he met Roland, who was a master of words, he naturally had no power to resist. Taking advantage of this time, the group arrived at the bottom of the dungeon. The area here was much smaller than the upper floors, and there were only 2 cells in total. The warden lit the torch on the wall, and as the darkness faded, Roland saw the witch curled up in the corner of the wall. It was now late autumn, and the temperature in the dungeon was so low that he could see his own breath. He was wearing a wool coat with a silk lining, so naturally he didn't feel cold. But the witch only had a single coat, which couldn't completely cover her body, and the exposed arms and soles of her feet had been frozen to the point where no blood could be seen. The sudden light of the torch made her turn her head sideways, and she closed her eyes. But soon, she opened her eyes and looked straight at him. It was a pair of light blue eyes, calm like a lake before a rainstorm. There was no fear on her face, nor anger or hatred. Roland had an illusion, as if he was not looking at a weak little girl, but a shadow that was swallowing the flame. For a moment, he felt that the light of the torch on the wall had dimmed a bit. She tried to stand up against the wall, but her movements were slow, as if she would fall at any time. But finally she stood up completely, and from the corner, she staggered to the place where the light could reach. It was such a simple action, but it made everyone gasp, and they all took 2 steps back. Only the knight moved in front of him. "What's your name?" Roland patted the knight's shoulder, indicating that he didn't need to be so nervous. Chapter 4. What happened when the mine collapsed? Tell me again in detail. Anna nodded and began to narrate the story. Roland was a little surprised. He had thought that the other party would remain silent, complain, or even curse, but she only cooperated with him and answered his questions, saying whatever he asked. The story was not complicated. Anna's father was a miner, and was working in the mine when the mine collapsed. Anna immediately went into the mine with the other miners' family members to rescue him. The North Slope mine was said to be an underground monster's lair. There were many forks in the mine that led in all directions. Because the rescuers did not have a unified command, they scattered and searched on their own after entering the mine. When Anna found her father, only Aunt Susan and Uncle Anchor were there. She found her father's leg crushed by a cart full of ore. He could not move, and a miner was squatting beside him, searching for money. Seeing that his robbery was discovered, the miner rushed up with a hoe and knocked Uncle Anchor to the ground. Just as he was about to kill him, Anna killed him first. The neighbors swore not to tell anyone about her, and the 3 of them rescued Anna's father together. But before dawn the next day, Anna's father went out on crutches and reported that his daughter was a witch to the patrolling guards. Why? Roland could not help but ask. Bear sighed. It's probably for the bounty. Anyone who finds and reports a witch will get 25 golden dragon. For a man with a broken leg, 25 golden dragon is equivalent to insurance for the rest of his life. Roland was silent for a moment. He was a strong adult man. How did you kill him? Just then Anna smiled. Like a ripple on the surface of a lake, the tip of the torch swayed. It's the power of the devil you mentioned. Shut up. Demoness! The warden shouted, but everyone could hear the tremble in his voice. Really? I want to see. Prince Roland was unmoved. Your Highness, this isn't a joke. Chief Knight turned around and said with a frown. Roland walked out from behind the knight and walked towards the cage. You can leave if you're afraid. I'm not asking you to stay here. Don't panic. She still has the god's locket of retribution on her neck. Barrow comforted everyone, but at the same time, it seemed like he was comforting himself. No matter how powerful the devil is, he can't break God's protection. Roland, who was standing in front of the prison bars, was only an arm's length away from Anna. He could clearly see her dusty and scarred face. Her tender facial features meant that she was not yet an adult, but there was not a trace of childishness in her expression. Not only that, even anger was hard to find. Roland had only seen this kind of incongruity on TV. It was the appearance of homeless orphans who suffered from poverty, hunger, cold, and other hardships when they were interviewed. But it wasn't exactly the same. Homeless orphans always hunched their bodies and lowered their heads when facing the camera, but Anna didn't. Even now, she was still trying to stand up straight, her eyes slightly raised, and calmly looked straight into the prince's eyes. She wasn't afraid of death, Roland realized. She was waiting for it. Is this the first time you've seen a witch, Your Highness? Your curiosity might get you killed. If it's really the power of the devil, I'll suffer misfortune just by looking at it, Roland replied. Then the one who died shouldn't be me but your father. The fire in the cage suddenly dimmed. This time, it was definitely not an illusion. The fire seemed to be suppressed by something, and soon there was only a small cluster left. He heard rapid breathing and prayers behind him, as well as the muffled sound of someone accidentally falling while retreating in a panic. Roland's heart gradually beat faster. He felt that he was at a wonderful dividing point. On one side was the world of common sense, operating meticulously according to the planned constants and laws. On the other side was an incredible world, full of mysteries and unknowns. He was now standing in front of the gate of this new world. Is the god's locket of retribution hanging on her neck? What a simple and crude chain. A piece of red iron chain with a crystal pendant hanging on it. If the witch's hands weren't firmly cuffed behind her back, this kind of thing could be broken with a pull, right? Roland turned around and glanced at the crowd. While they were still praying in panic, he quickly reached his hand into the cage, grabbed the pendant and pulled it hard. The pendant broke from the buckle of the chain. Even Anna was stunned by his action. Come on, he whispered. Are you a liar, a chemist, or a real witch? If you take out bottles and jars, and start to mix strong acids now, I'll be disappointed, he thought. Then Roland heard a crackling sound, which was the sound of water vapor being heated and expanding. White fog rose from the ground, and the surrounding temperature rose sharply. He saw flames rising from the witch's feet, gently licking the girl's bare calves. And then the ground where she stood was burning. The torches behind her exploded at the same time, as if they had received pure oxygen, bursting into a dazzling light. The whole prison became as bright as day, accompanied by the screams of horror. The witch stepped forward, the flames following her footsteps. When she came to the edge of the prison, dozens of iron bars turned into pillars of fire. Roland had to step back, the hot air biting his skin, making him unbearable pain. In just a few breaths, he felt like he had returned from late autumn to midsummer. No, it was different from the heat of summer. This kind of high temperature purely generated by the flames couldn't completely surround him. The side facing the flames was hot, while the side facing away was cold. He even felt himself breaking out in a cold sweat. She wasn't afraid of the flames. Roland remembered the words of the assistant minister. Only now did he deeply understand the meaning of these words. She herself was a flame. How could she be afraid of him? Soon, the iron bars turned from crimson to bright yellow, and began to melt and change shape. This meant that they had been heated to more than 1,500 degrees, without any thermal insulation, which was far beyond Roland's imagination. Like the others, he had already distanced himself from the cell, tightly clinging to the farthest stone wall. If he didn't do this, the high heat generated by the molten iron, even if he didn't come into direct contact, would still set his clothes on fire. For example, Anna, her prison clothes had already turned into ashes, her body surrounded by raging flames. After an unknown period of time, the flames all faded. Only a small section of the torch was left on the wall, quietly burning, as if nothing had happened. But the sweaty clothes, the hot air, and the prison bars that had been burned like the claws of the devil, all told everyone that this was not a dream. Except for Roland and the knight who were still standing, the others had collapsed to the ground, including the warden who was so scared that he wet his pants. The naked Anna was now standing outside the cell. The shackles that bound her arms had disappeared. She didn't cover her body, her hands naturally hanging by her side, her lake blue eyes restored to their previous tranquility. I satisfied your curiosity, my lord, she said. Now can you kill me? Chapter 5. The second law of thermodynamics. It is impossible to transfer heat from a low-temperature object to a high-temperature object without causing other effects. Or it is impossible to take heat from a single heat source and convert it into useful work without causing other effects. Or the entropy increment in an irreversible thermodynamic process is always greater than zero. Roland wrote this law on a piece of paper, using the language of this world. At first glance, it looked like earthworm writing, and he really couldn't understand how the locals learned such a complicated language. If asked which of the many laws of physics was the most boring, Roland would definitely choose the second law of thermodynamics. It told everyone that the heat in this world would always flow from high to low, disorder would replace order, and entropy would constantly increase. In the end, everyone would return to nothingness, and the universe would become dead silent. But this world got rid of the problem of increasing entropy, and magic could be created out of nothing, which was even greater than the invention of a perpetual motion machine. The power of the devil? Roland sneered at this. They simply didn't understand the nature of this power. In the big picture, it could even change the whole universe. Of course, now we can start by changing Border Town. Humming a tune, Roland tore off the paper and threw it into the fireplace. Seeing it turn into ashes in the fire, he felt a kind of pleasure of annihilation. The assistant minister looked at the prince's inexplicable actions and was confused. But fortunately, the prince was always like this, and he could see that the prince was in a good mood. "It's done, the witch was hanged at noon," Bearov reported. "Well, no one should have seen anything, right?" Roland lightly nodded his pen. Anyway, they were all wearing masks. In order to prevent the church and the Witch Cooperation Association from coming to the door, Roland ordered the prison warden to find a death row prisoner from the dungeon to replace Anna. And except for the chief knight and the assistant minister, everyone was rewarded with 20 golden dragons as hush money. This was a very rich income for them. Bearov had also suggested that the witnesses should be silenced forever. But Roland had flatly rejected the idea. He knew that these secrets would not be kept for long, but it didn't matter. He actually hoped that someone would spread the news, as long as it was not now. It was only a matter of time before they fell out with the church. No one could tolerate those idiots wasting resources like this. What would the other witches think if they knew that there was a small town on the border of the kingdom that allowed them to live freely and even gave them generous treatment? No matter what era it was, talents were always the most important. "So that's it," Roland ordered. "Next, I want you to give me a summary of Border Town's trade, taxes, and necessary expenditures for the last year. Also, I want you to calculate the number and scale of the workshops in the city, ironware, textiles, pottery, and so on. It will take 3 days to sort out these records, but..." Bearov first nodded, but then he hesitated. "Is there anything else?" Roland knew that it was time to test his ability to talk. The other party would definitely be suspicious of what he had done yesterday. Although he was a hedonist, having a bad character did not mean that he had a hole in his brain. In the eyes of the assistant minister, hiding a witch was simply an enemy of the world. "Your Highness, I don't understand." Bearov carefully chose his words. "In the past, although you have caused trouble, they were all harmless. But why do you want to take such a big risk to save a witch? Although hunting them is a law set by the church, but your father, His Majesty Wimbledon, also agrees with it." Roland thought for a moment, then asked, "Do you think Border Town is a good place?" Although he didn't quite understand the connection between this sentence and his own question, Bearov still answered truthfully, "It's not good. It's very bad. Compared to Valencia and the port of Clearwater. What do you think is the possibility of me winning against my siblings?" The assistant minister opened his mouth, but didn't answer. "Almost zero. So I can only change the way." Roland expressionlessly watched the other step by step fall into his own trap. "A way that will leave a deep impression on my father." He didn't start from the perspective of whether a witch was evil or not, because that would have little effect. Bearov had been an assistant to the Minister of Finance for 20 years, and could already be regarded as a qualified politician. For a politician, benefits were more convincing than good and evil. In addition, taking the emotional route was also not suitable for him. Roland recalled the previous actions of the fourth prince, and found that he really couldn't be regarded as a good and lawful alignment. So he chose the eternal conflict between the secular monarchy and the religious theocracy as a starting point. The growing power of the church was already a thorn in the heart of Wimbledon III. The church claimed that the world operated according to the will of God, and the Pope was the spokesman of God. If the people found out that what he said was not true, and was full of loopholes, the dominance of the religion would be greatly shaken. Directly saying, witches aren't evil, so I want to save them would be difficult to convince the other side. But instead saying witches aren't evil, so I can use them to attack the church, would easily lead Berov to his own predetermined conclusion. No matter how prosperous my brothers and sisters are, they are just in the pocket of the church. They have already wantonly proclaimed that the monarchy is bestowed by God. If only the person who is crowned by the Pope can be regarded as the legitimate king, then the actual ruler of this land is still us? Roland paused. And Father can see in me such a hope. A kingdom without the suppression of the church, where the royal family alone enjoys all the power. Then his choice is very clear. Changing the whole world, to only the church, was much easier to accept, not to mention that Berov himself was on the side of the royal family. Similarly, if he realizes that these people with strange abilities will be the basis of prying open the church, the hunting order is just a joke. One side is impossible, the other side is not zero. Do you think it's worth the risk? Roland stared at the assistant minister and said word by word. Don't doubt my decision, Berov. You have been an assistant minister for 20 years, right? If I can become Wimbledon IV, you can get rid of the word assistant. Or go further, for example, the hand of the king? Looking at Berov's back, Roland gently breathed a sigh of relief. It was obvious that he did not take his promise too seriously, which was normal. Even Roland himself did not believe that this arrogant plan that he had just made up could be realized. But that was not important at all. The key was to make Berov believe that he really thought so. A simple plan that a playboy could come up with not only matched Prince Roland's hatred for the church, but also paved the way for more witches in the future. As for his real thoughts, even if they knew they could not understand, Roland called a maid. Call Miss Anna to see me. Chapter 6. There was a shed in the castle's back garden, surrounded by wooden planks, leaving only 2 holes for windows. In the center of the shed was a square pool made of green bricks, about 3 meters long and wide, filled with loess. After adding an appropriate amount of water, the loess was not only resistant to fire, but also had a certain degree of plasticity, so a small shovel could be used to dig out the ideal shape. There were also a few iron ingots on top of the loess. These were brought here by Carter Lannis from the blacksmith shop. Next to the pool was a well, which Roland had taken a fancy to, so he ordered people to build the shed here. However, as a laboratory it was still too simple. He shook his head. The things that were pieced together in one night naturally couldn't be said to be ideal. As for the formal workshop, he had to wait for Berov to finish collecting information before he could start construction. How was it? Did you sleep well last night? He turned around and looked at Anna's blank face, asking with a smile. The witch's current appearance was completely different from her appearance in the prison. After careful cleaning, her flaxen hair was soft and glossy, and although her skin was not maintained, it was still young, and the light freckles on the bridge of her nose added to her youthful vitality. Her figure was still thin, and her slender body looked like it would fall with a push, but her cheeks were rosy, and the bruises and strangulation marks on her neck were much lighter than yesterday. Roland suspected that the magic not only gave witches magical powers, but also improved their physical qualities. At least in terms of recovery ability, Anna was much faster than ordinary people. Originally, after experiencing so many terrible things, I should have let you rest for a few more days, but time is really tight, so I can only wait until later to compensate you. Roland circled around the girl. Does this dress fit you? The clothes that Anna was currently wearing were carefully selected from a variety of plans, in order to satisfy his bad taste. The full-body protective clothing of a smelter was too thick and not suitable for her. Although the mage robe in the game looked elegant, it was very difficult to move, and the fully wrapped robe could easily be touched by a spark and turn into ashes. As for the maid dress, hey, is there anything more suitable than this? Even if this world had yet to have real maid outfits, it was not a big problem. The maid outfits already had the embryonic form of maid outfits in the future. So Roland asked Tyr to make a set of clothes according to Anna's figure. He shortened the skirt, changed the long sleeves to short sleeves, changed the round collar to a folded collar and tied a bow. Just like that, the new witch uniform came out of the oven. Paired with a pointy witch hat, custom-made, black boots, ready-made, and a knee-length cape custom-made, a character that could only be seen in movies stood in front of Roland. Your Highness, what do you need me to do? Anna really couldn't keep up with the thoughts of this big shot in front of her. She felt that she was about to lose the ability to think. When she was put into a bag and dragged away in the dungeon, she thought that her cursed life would soon be free. But after taking off the hood, Anna found that what she saw was not a gallows or a guillotine, but a large, magnificent house. Then a group of people came in, undressing and bathing her. From her armpits to her toes, there was not a place that wasn't wiped clean. Then it was time to change clothes. She didn't expect that she would need someone to help her dress, and she didn't think that the clothes could be so comfortable. They were soft and attached to her body, without any friction. The last one to come in was an old man with a white beard. After he ordered everyone to leave, he put a contract in front of her. At this moment she understood that the one who said that she would be hired in the prison was the kingdom's fourth prince. And it was not a joke. The contract clearly stated that if she worked for the prince, she would be paid a golden dragon every month. Anna knew what a golden dragon meant. Her father worked in the mine all day long, and his salary was determined by the amount of ore produced. Even during the best times, his harvest was only 1 silver royal, and 100 silver royals could be exchanged for 1 golden dragon. And this also depended on whether the silver royals were good enough. So what was her job? Accompanying the prince to sleep? When she was bathing, Anna did hear the maids whispering about it, but she didn't think she was worth the price. Her blood had been eroded by the devil, and she was a degenerate. Anyone who knew her true identity would only avoid her. Even if the prince was so curious that he wasn't even afraid of the devil, he didn't need to pay her anything. That night, no one came to find her, and she fell asleep. It was the softest bed Anna had ever slept in her life, so she fell asleep as soon as she lay on it. When she opened her eyes the next day, it was already noon, and lunch was sent to her room: bread, cheese, and a steak. She had already planned to die. For a person who had decided to give up her life, what kind of nostalgia would she have for this world? What was she thinking at first? But after putting the steak into her mouth, Anna couldn't help but burst into tears. The mixture of meat juice and pepper melted in her mouth, and the strong spicy flavor mixed with a hint of sweetness repeatedly hit her taste buds. And even after swallowing it, it still filled her mouth. She suddenly felt that there was still a little bit of beauty in this world. If she could eat this kind of food every day, even if the devil invaded her body, she would have more courage to resist, right? At this moment, standing in this wooden shed that didn't look like a bedroom, nor did it look like a cage, she secretly made up her mind. Since the other side needed it, then whether it was wearing such strange clothes, or summoning that incredible power, she was willing to give it a try. So she asked again, but this time she didn't hesitate. Your Royal Highness, what do you need me to do? For now, you have to control your power, and practice it over and over again, until you can control it freely. You mean the devil's? No, Miss Anna, Roland interrupted. It's your power. The witch blinked her beautiful blue eyes. Most people in the world are prejudiced against you, thinking that the witch's power comes from the devil, and is extremely evil. In fact, they are wrong. Roland squatted down and looked at the other side. And you also don't think so, right? He remembered Anna's chuckle in the dungeon. How could a person who thought of herself as evil give out such a sarcastic laugh? I have never used it to hurt anyone, she said softly. Except for that robber. Resisting against aggression is not a fault. You did the right thing. People fear you because they don't understand you. They know that constant training can make a strong warrior, but they don't know how to become a witch. The unknown power is always frightening. You're not afraid at all, Anna said. Because I know it belongs to you. Roland laughed. If that robber also had such amazing power, I wouldn't dare to stand in front of him. Chapter 7. The flame rose from her feet and quickly faded away. This was the 23rd practice. She failed again. Anna's forehead was already sweating. She wiped it with the back of her hand, and the hot air suddenly surged and made a sizzling sound. She did not stop, and immediately began the next practice. The witch uniform was neatly folded and placed aside. If she had not insisted on doing this at the beginning, the uniform would have turned into ashes in the flame. Fortunately, as Prince Roland, it was not difficult to get a few spare ones. He asked Tyr to send a whole bucket of robes. They were temporarily collected from the maids. The 24th practice finally paid off. The flame no longer rose from her feet, but appeared out of thin air in her palm. She carefully raised her arm and wanted to move it to her fingertips, but the flame flickered twice and suddenly rushed up her arm, ignited her sleeve, and swallowed the robe along the sleeve. Anna put away the flame, tore off half of the burnt robe expressionlessly, and turned to look for a new one in the bucket. Every time this happened, Roland would look away and let his eyes stare somewhere else, even though she did not care about it at all. In fact, if it were not for Roland's strong request, she would probably practice naked. But then Roland could not look at her properly. He really could not calmly face a naked little girl, especially when the little girl turned into a flame. Her figure had a different kind of charm. Roland shook his head and put the distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. Judging from the current situation, it would not be easy to control this power. He set a goal for Anna: to release the flame from the palm or fingers, not to harm the clothes on the body, and to maintain a high enough temperature to melt the pig iron ingots in the pool. When the 30th practice failed, Roland stopped her. "Take a break." Anna looked at him blankly and did not respond. Roland had to walk over, take the girl's hand to the chair, and forced her to sit down. "You are tired. You should rest when you are tired. Don't force yourself. We still have a lot of time." He helped her wipe her sweaty forehead. "Let's have afternoon tea first." Roland knew that the nobles of Grey Castle Kingdom did not have the habit of enjoying afternoon tea. The productivity of this world was so poor that it was difficult for people to have the leisure to enjoy exquisite food. 3 meals were not even common, let alone 4 meals. As for the playboys who had nothing better to do, they were usually gathered in bars or casinos. If he did not have this habit, he would create one. There were ready-made pastries, and if there was no tea, he could use ale instead. After knowing that he was going to a remote border town, Prince Roland brought his maids, servants, and cooks with him. Thus, in a simple wooden shed in the castle's back garden, the first afternoon tea party was held. Anna couldn't believe her eyes as she stared at the plates of exquisite desserts. How could food be made to look so good? Although she didn't know the specific name of the pastry, the combination of the pure white appearance and the bright red fruit was enough to whet one's appetite, especially when the pastry was decorated with several delicate patterns, which once again left a heavy stroke on her worldview. Roland proudly looked at Anna's bewildered expression. "Isn't it just a strawberry cream cake? Look at how this country bumpkin is scared. Moreover, this strawberry is pickled with sugar, so it doesn't taste fresh." What was more interesting than eating was to enjoy the witch's expression. Roland watched her carefully put the cake into her mouth, her blue eyes almost shining, and her hair swaying back and forth. In his heart, he suddenly had the illusion that he was watching a food cartoon. Dishes that don't shine are not good dishes. Well, the feeling of cultivating this kind of character is also very good. So watching Anna practice and accompanying her to enjoy afternoon tea became Roland's daily life. Even if he didn't ask about government affairs, Bhairav would still help him take care of them in an orderly manner. 3 days later, Bhairav sorted out all kinds of information about Border Town and sent it to Roland's office. This was absolutely inconceivable before. But Prince Roland unexpectedly had the patience to read such a large pile of cumbersome reports. In fact, he didn't have any now. Roland only read 2 lines and felt dizzy, so he directly said to Bhairav, "You read it to me." After spending an hour listening to the assistant minister's report, he found something wrong. Why is Border Town's annual winter taxes and trade 0? Winter temperatures are low, so the harvest is understandable. But what does it mean to directly return to zero? Do the local people have the habit of hibernating? Barov coughed twice. Your Highness, have you forgotten? Winter is the months of the demons. Border town doesn't have the ability to defend itself, so all the residents have to move to Longsong's stronghold. But please rest assured, Your Highness's safety is definitely the first priority. Months of the demons. Roland recalled that there seemed to be such a term. Before, he didn't take the ghost legends, the evil witches and so on seriously, thinking that it was nothing more than nonsense in the uncivilized world. But now it seemed that witches did exist, regardless of whether they were evil or not. So, what about the other widely circulated ghost legends? When he was teaching in the palace, the history teacher had talked about the months of the demons in detail. Every year after the first snow fell, the sun would be dim, and the gates of hell in Dragon's Pine Mountain would open at this time. The evil breath from hell would erode the living, turning them into the devil's servants. Some of the animals would mutate into powerful demonic beasts and attack humans. Most of the witches were born in this season, and their power was far greater than usual. Have you seen it? The gates of hell? Roland asked. Your Highness, how can ordinary people see it? Barov shook his head. Dragon's Pine Mountain is impossible to cross. Even approaching the mountain will be affected by the evil breath. The lightest case is an unbearable headache. The most serious case is loss of mind. Unless what? Unless that person is a witch. Only witches can see the gates of hell, because they have fallen into the devil's minions. So naturally they are not affected by the evil breath. At this point, Barov also turned his head to look at the back garden. What about demonic beasts? Have you seen demonic beasts? Roland unhappily knocked on the table. Well, I haven't seen them. Like Your Highness, this is the first time I've come to the border. In Grey Castle, in the center of the kingdom, almost no one can encounter real evil. If they move once a year, how can this place develop? Originally, he thought that border town was only barren, but still had the potential to develop. But now it seemed that it was simply a big pit. Longsong's stronghold can resist the demonic beasts, which means that they can also be killed. They are not invincible. Then why can't we defeat them in border town? Longsong's stronghold has a huge wall, and is also stationed with Duke Ryan's elite troops, which is not something a small place like border town can compare with, Barov explained. From the beginning, the purpose of establishing border town was to provide an early warning for the stronghold, so it was established between the North Slope Ridge and the Redwater River. Chapter 8. If they wanted to develop well, they had to take root here. If the land was not good, they could cultivate wastelands. If the territory was too small, they could expand outwards. But if the people were gone, everything would be empty talk. If a territory could be abandoned at any time, then who would be willing to buy a house here? Who would be willing to produce in peace? After the assistant minister left, Roland called Carter Lannis his chief knight. Take your people and find me some local guards, hunters or farmers. They must have stayed here for more than 5 years, and experienced the months of the demons. It would be best if someone had fought with the demonic beasts. The knight left. Roland rubbed his forehead, and continued to look at the summary of the information. The main output of border town was minerals and animal fur. The main import was food. All the transportation was through the Redwater River to Longsong's stronghold or Willowtown. There were all kinds of minerals: iron, copper, sulfur, crystal, ruby, sapphire. This had completely exceeded the concept of associated minerals. He remembered Anna had said that the North Slope mine was rumored to be an underground lair of unknown monsters. Until now, it had not been fully explored how many forks there were at the bottom of the mine. Roland frowned when he turned to the item of food. Most of these ores were sold to Longsong's stronghold, but they didn't pay with the kingdom's gold royals. Instead they paid with food. It was reasonable to say that gems and the like could be regarded as luxury goods. But after several years of trading, border town did not have much surplus food, and the financial income was not surplus. In other words, border town's annual mining output could only be exchanged for a year's rations for 2,000 residents. Considering that before the prince came here, The lord himself was a descendant of the Duke of Longsong, so it was understandable for them to produce and sell their own food. Anyway, in their view, no matter how much food was stored here, it would only benefit the monsters. And the fur trade was the income of the local people. They went west into the concealing forest, hunting some birds and beasts, and sold them to the purchasers of Longsong Stronghold, or to the residents of Willow Town. Border Town did not set a tax on this trade, because there was no way to regulate it. Roland thought, since he was here, then the ore production could no longer be traded with food. The branches of the Redwater River almost ran through the whole kingdom, so the traffic was not blocked. With this transportation artery, even if Longsong Stronghold no longer provided food, he could still purchase it from other places. The premise was that he could stay here, in Border Town, and block those damn monsters. Carter acted very quickly. The next day he found 2 guards and a local hunter. These 2 are the patrol captains of Border Town. They are responsible for lighting the beacon every year. This hunter said that he had fought with demonic beasts, and even cut off the head of one with his own hands. The 3 of them bowed in unison. Roland nodded, and asked them to step aside. He then stepped forward one by one. Your Royal Highness. The first guard who was called was so nervous that he couldn't even speak clearly. Brian and I are people from here. After the snow falls, we will go to the North Slope Mines Fong Beacon Tower. From there we can see the movement of the demon beasts. If they cross the misty forest, we will light the beacon, retreat from the small road, and take the prepared boat to leave. Since you are together, call your partner to answer. Roland covered his face and shook his head. What do the demonic beasts look like? Can they be killed? Although the other guard was also very nervous, at least he didn't stutter. Your Royal Highness, it should be possible. They are just ordinary animals in the forest. Although they have been infected by the breath of hell, and become manic and vicious, but they can still be killed. Every year after the end of the months of the demons, Longsong Stronghold will send a cavalry team to clear the remaining demonic beasts on the road from the stronghold to Border Town. How long will the months of the demons last? Generally, it is 2 to 3 months. It depends on the sun, Brian said. Depends on the sun? Roland was puzzled. Yes, the guard explained. Your Royal Highness has just arrived here, so you don't know. Once it snows in Border Town, it will not stop until the sun regains its glory, and the snow will melt. The months of the demons won't end until the snow melts? Roland thought back. At least the snow in Grey Castle wasn't like this. It basically melted the next day, and the sun didn't change. That's right. The longest months of the demons I've experienced was 2 years ago. It lasted for nearly 4 months, and many people didn't make it through. Why, Longsong Stronghold doesn't even have a month's worth of food reserves? Roland asked. Brian's face became a little bad. They do. But at that time, the municipal official responsible for supplies, Reynolds, said that the ore we produced in the autumn was only enough to buy 3 months' worth of food, and the 4th month's supply would have to wait for the new batch of ore to arrive. But the months of the demons haven't passed, so we can't leave the stronghold. So that's how it is. I know. They are simply idiots who cut themselves off from the people. If Longsong Stronghold treated these border residents like a warm spring breeze, it would not be easy to make them stay. But now it seems that the group of people hiding behind the wall are not good people. Roland expressionlessly called for the last person to come up and answer, but in his heart, he took note of this name. The 3rd person looked very strong. When he stood up, he was almost 6 feet tall, which made Roland feel very pressured. Fortunately, as soon as he came up, he knelt down on one knee. You said that you have killed a demonic beast. Yes, Your Highness. His voice was low and hoarse. A wild boar and a wolf. Breed, Roland repeated. What do you mean? This is what the hunters call demonic beasts, Your Highness. The more ferocious the animal before mutation, the more difficult it is to deal with after mutation. Moreover, they will multiply the advantages of their original body. Like the wild boar, the fur on its back is extremely hard. Even a crossbow would find it difficult to penetrate 50 meters away. The wolf is more cunning. Its running speed is amazing. If you want to kill it, You need to set a trap in advance. Strong ones are stronger, faster ones are faster, Roland nodded. But they are still animals. That's right, they are not the most terrible enemies, the hunter said, swallowing his saliva. The most terrible are the mixed species. They are the incarnation of the devil. Only hell can create such a terrible monster. I have seen a mixed species. It not only has the strong limbs of a beast, but also has a pair of huge wings on its back, allowing it to fly short distances. Moreover, it seems to know where I am. No matter how I hide, it can always chase me out. It is not hunting, Your Highness. It is just playing with its prey. The hunter lifted his clothes, only to see a huge scar extending from his abdomen to his chest. Before I lost consciousness, I jumped into the Redwater River, so I survived. Chapter 9. Not many, Your Highness. During the months of the demons, there will only be 2 or 3 of these monsters. Otherwise Longsong's stronghold would be in big trouble. Very good. You have observed very carefully. Roland ordered the hunter to stand up. What's your name? You don't look like you're from Grey Castle. I have half Majin blood in me. The people in the town call me Iron Axe. Majin, the people of the desert in the southwest of the kingdom, said to be the descendants of the sand giants. Roland searched his mind for relevant memories. He didn't use the clan name, but used the title. Obviously he didn't want to have anything to do with the people of the Sand Nation. As for why he came to this remote place from the southwest border, it was estimated that there was a series of bitter stories. But those were not important. Border Town didn't care about one's origin. Roland clapped his hands. Today's questions will end here, Carter. Reward each of them with 10 silver royals. Take them away. Thank you, Your Highness, for the reward, the 3 said in unison. After taking them away, Carter Lannis returned. Your Highness, you asked these questions. Do you want to stay here? Roland didn't express his opinion. What do you think? This is absolutely not possible, Your Highness, the knight said loudly. According to the hunter, the wild boar type of demonic beast is very difficult to deal with. If the crossbow can't shoot from 50 steps away, then we have to wait until 40 or 30 steps away to shoot again. This can only be done by the elite soldiers of Longsong Stronghold. Coupled with their large numbers, without a strong city wall to rely on, if we only rely on the local guards to stop them, I'm afraid that the casualties will exceed 10%. Before we met the witch, you also said the same thing. Can't you think of everything in a positive way? Roland sighed. This, although the witch is evil, but Miss Anna doesn't seem to be so. As your knight, I must be realistic. Really? What if I give you a city wall? What? For a moment, Carter thought he had heard wrong. I'll give you a city wall, between the foot of the northern slope mountain and the Redwater River, Roland said word by word. Although it won't be as majestic as the walls of Grey Castle King's City, it should still be enough to block strange beasts. Your Highness, do you know what you are saying? The knight was so angry that he laughed. There's a limit to messing around. If you don't leave when the time comes, I'll have to forgive my rudeness. There's still 3 months, isn't there? According to the records, the first snow usually comes at the end of February after winter. 3 years isn't enough. Building a city wall required a large number of workers, starting from the foundation with compacted earth. It had to be tamped down every 1 to 2 feet. Otherwise, the pile would collapse if it was too high. This is only the simplest earthen wall. Carter shook his head. Brick and stone walls are even slower. It requires hundreds of stonemasons to cut the stones into squares, and then build them one by one. Your Highness, every city wall is built this way. There has never been an exception. Making a city rise from the ground between day and night, that's a story that only exists in myths and legends. Roland signaled him not to say any more. I understand. You don't have to jump to conclusions so quickly. If there's no reliable city wall, I'll evacuate with you to Longsong Stronghold. I don't intend to lose my life in this damned place. The knight knelt down on one knee. I'll protect you with my life. In the castle garden, Roland took a sip of bitter ale. Looking at Anna, who was concentrating on eating cream pastries, his mood recovered a lot. He had decided to stop the demonic beasts in Border Town. If they couldn't even defend their base camp, how could they talk about farming? If they wanted to build a wall connecting the North Slope and the Redwater River in 3 months, they would have to use a reasonable plan and a new era of technology. Roland didn't suddenly come up with this idea. He had already checked the surroundings of Border Town. Although he didn't go there personally, he still had a clear picture in his memory. The North Slope was only 600 meters away from the Redwater River. It was simply a natural pass. And because the North Slope mine had been mined all year round, it was surrounded by rocks and gravel mined from the cave. These gravel had a grayish-white surface. It was rich in calcium carbonate. After grinding, it could be used as limestone. And with limestone, it was equivalent to cement. That's right, this hydraulic material, which changed the history of human construction, had a wide range of raw materials, and was easy to prepare. It was one of the best farming tools. Roland calculated in his mind. He didn't want to make concrete. It wasn't that he couldn't do it technically, but the amount of cement consumed was too large. He wasn't sure if he could calcine so much cement powder in 3 months. In addition to the poor toughness of concrete, it needed to be matched with steel bars to become a complete body. So it was obviously not realistic to make a concrete wall. To maximize the amount of cement, but also to use existing materials, then the self-weight rubble wall was the most appropriate choice. The so-called rubble was a stone that hadn't been polished. It had a natural appearance when it was just mined. Because of the irregular shape of the stone, it couldn't be built directly. It needed a stonemason to process it into the shape of a brick. The rubble wall, on the other hand, used cement as a binder. No matter how strange the shape of the stone, it could be piled up. The gap between the stone and the stone would be filled with cement, not only saving cement, but also not picking materials. The general direction was set, but the actual implementation, I'm afraid I still have to do it myself. Roland thought. Whether it was calcined cement or rubble wall, they were all new things. Except for himself, no one had seen these things, and no one knew how to do it. I'm afraid the next 3 months will be very busy. Look, Anna's crisp voice came from behind. Roland turned his head. He saw a small cluster of flame quietly appeared in her palm. There was no wind around, but the flame was moving up and down, as if it was nodding to her. She shook her finger. The flame was like a toddler, slowly moving to the tip of her finger. Finally, it stopped at the tip of her index finger and calmed down. You did it. An incredible scene, Roland exclaimed in his heart. This was not a magic trick, nor was it a chemical trick, but a real supernatural power. But this was not what attracted Roland the most. What was more dazzling than the flame was Anna's expression. She stared intently at her fingertip. Her lake-like clear eyes reflected the dancing flame, like an elf sealed in a sapphire. The traces of torture left on her body by the prison had faded. Although she still rarely smiled, her face was no longer lifeless. The tip of the girl's small nose was oozing a little sweat. Her white and rosy cheeks were exuding vitality. Even looking at it would make people feel happy. What's wrong with you? Nothing. Roland realized that he had been staring at her for too long. He looked away, coughed twice, then tried to use it to melt the iron. In the past few days, besides eating and sleeping, she would practice repeatedly in the shed. That hard work made Roland feel ashamed. Even when he was facing the college entrance examination, he didn't work so hard. Chapter 10. The weather was not good this Sunday, and the sky was always gray. Carl Van Bate's mood was as gloomy as the weather. Walking on the wet stone street, people greeted him from time to time. In this small town, Carl ran an academy. Unlike the academies in Grey Castle that only children of nobles could attend, he also taught for ordinary children. Therefore, he had a high reputation in Border Town. Hey, Mr. Van Bate, good morning. Sir, is my son doing well? When are you free, Carl? Let's go fishing together. Usually, Carl would respond to them with a smile, but today he just nodded without saying a word. Since witnessing Anna's hanging, the world in his eyes had cracked, or it had been there since he left Grey Castle, but he deliberately turned a blind eye to it. He used his busy work to numb himself, and the innocent smile of a student covered the crack to some extent. It was not until Anna died that he realized that the world had not changed at all. Not only did the crack not disappear, but it expanded. His memory of Anna stopped at half a year ago. She was not conspicuous among the more than 30 children in the academy. She looked ordinary and did not talk much. But there was one thing that impressed Carr. That was her passion for knowledge. No matter what he taught, whether it was literature or history, she was always the first to remember. Even the history of religious evolution, which even he found boring, could be read for a whole day. He had also seen the little girl helping to take care of the neighbor's sheep. In the sun, Anna carefully brushed the sheep's hair, her movements as gentle as taking care of a baby. He still remembered that scene very clearly. The girl's smile was sweet and cheerful, and it was impossible to associate it with evil in any way. Later, there was a fire in the neighborhood, and Anna's mother unfortunately passed away, so Anna did not come to the academy again. Until a week ago, she was proved to be a witch and hanged in the square in the center of the town. Tempted by the devil? Unclean person? Evil person? All bullshit. For the first time, he doubted the Holy See and the knowledge he had taught. He didn't know whether Anna was a witch or not, but the word evil didn't belong to her. If a young girl full of curiosity about the world could be called evil, then the administrators of Grey Castle should be devils from hell. For hundreds of golden dragon, they deliberately changed the stone, causing the collapse of the new theater, and more than 30 members of the Mason Guild to die. But did they go to the gallows? Not even one. The judge finally sentenced the leader of the Mason Guild to be exiled, and the Mason Guild was disbanded. Carl, who knew the inside story, had to flee the kingdom of Grey Castle with his family in order to avoid the limelight. He went all the way west and finally arrived at Border Town. He started a college, had many students, met new neighbors, and made new friends. But the crime in the kingdom of Grey Castle was always engraved in his mind. Now he once again felt the mockery of the world. What exactly was evil? Could the gods in the sky really see it clearly? Nana was different from Anna, and could even be said to be the complete opposite. She was a very lively girl, and she was quite famous in the academy. She was a very lively girl, and she was also quite famous in the academy. As long as she was not in class, she rarely stopped. She was either riding on a tree and playing with birds, or rolling in the grass. When asked what she was doing, she giggled for a while, and then answered that she was listening to a quarrel between a grasshopper and an ant. Nana's face was always full of laughter, which seemed to be her nature. This miserable and difficult world had nothing to do with her. At least in the academy, she could always laugh carefreely. Carr was even a little curious. Had she ever cried since she was born? Until 2 days ago, Nana came to him with a sad face. "Teacher, will I be hanged like Anna?" Only then did he know that his student, Nana Pine, had also become a witch. "Ah, isn't that Mr. Van Bate? Please come over here and help us see what's written on it." Carr felt someone pulling his sleeve. He looked up and found that he did not know when he had walked to the town square. Many middle-aged people were shouting around the bulletin board, and when they heard Van Bate's name, they consciously made way. "You came at the right time, sir. Please help us see." Yes, originally it was Meg who read it, but she said she had a stomachache and went to the toilet. She hasn't come back yet. Usually, he would smile and nod, and then explain the contents of the bulletin board in detail to the crowd. But now Carr found that he could not do it. These people's smiles and enthusiasm did not seem fake, but for him, it was more unbearable than wearing a fake smile. The notice to hang Anna was also posted in the same way, and everyone was discussing it in high spirits. "In a sense, you are all murderers," he said in his heart. "Your ignorance and stupidity killed her." Carr suppressed his emotions, took a deep breath, and walked in front of the bulletin board. "The prince is recruiting people to build Border Town. There are a variety of jobs to choose from," he read. "But I am also one of the murderers, so what right do I have to blame them? Wasn't it me who told them that witches were evil?" Carl felt bitter at the corner of his mouth. "Look at what I've been saying to the children. I've been repeating the church's teachings, and I still think I've taught them well." Gravel worker, male, 20 to 40 years old, strong body. Daily pay 25 copper royals. Clay worker, no gender limit, 18 years old or older, with experience in masonry, daily pay 45 copper royals. Handyman, male, 18 years old or older, daily pay 12 copper royals. No, he had to do something. If Anna's death was irreversible, then at least he couldn't let Nana repeat the same mistake. There was a voice in Car's heart. He didn't stand up when the Stonemason Association was destroyed. He didn't stand up when Anna was hanged. Did he have to stay silent and watch these lovely children be sent to the gallows? But what could he do? Take Nana and escape from Border Town. He had his own family. He and his family had come here from Grey Castle. The situation had just improved, and now he had to leave? Not to mention that Nana herself was born in a rich family. How could she stand a life without a fixed place to live? Stonemason. No gender limit, no age limit. Anyone who has participated in municipal construction, stronghold or fortifications. Long-term recruitment in City Hall. Monthly pay 1 golden dragon. Additional terms. Experienced and outstanding performance can be awarded an official position. After the announcement was read, the crowd was already noisy. 1 golden dragon monthly pay. This is comparable to the Longsong Stronghold's cavalry. But will you? You can't even build a dung pit. How can you build a stronghold? Don't just stare at this. The first few are also very good. If you pay every day, it won't be much less than hunting. Indeed, you can lose your life hunting. The concealing forest is not a place you can go casually. Car Van Bate didn't pay attention to this. All his attention was focused on the seal and signature at the end of the announcement. That was the autograph of the 4th Prince, Roland Wimbledon. Doesn't the prince know that soon it will be the months of the demons? No matter what he wants to build, this is not a good time to start. It seems that His Highness Wimbledon knows nothing about construction. If I can attract his attention with the name of the Stonemason Association. Car suddenly had an idea. Maybe through this recruitment, he could meet the prince himself, the supreme ruler of Border Town. This idea made Car swallow his saliva. Convince the prince that witches are not evil? It is said that His Highness has a unique way of thinking, different character from ordinary people, and extremely hates the church. Maybe it will work, he thought. Although in the end it was Prince Roland who ordered Anna to be hanged, it was obvious that he was unwilling. The prince himself is only in his early 20s. He should be able to understand. How can those budding girls suddenly become unforgivable evil people? Of course, there is another possibility. That is, he will be regarded as an accomplice of the witches and sent to the gallows together. The law of the church clearly states that anyone who harms or pleads for a witch should be regarded as a degenerate evil person. I can only hope that the prince, who hates the church, will also regard the law of the church as waste paper. Car prayed in his heart. Although he didn't know which god to pray to, he still closed his eyes and prayed for a blessing. For the dead Anna, for the still alive Nana, so that the crack in his heart will not expand. Chapter 11. The sea breeze has become cold. Looking at the endless ocean, Garcia Wimbledon smoothed her hair that had been messed up by the wind, and said with a slight regret, "Because winter is coming," replied a handsome man behind her. "Although this place belongs to the south, it is not the southernmost land. Only the Sand Nation doesn't understand what winter is. Our fleet can't leave the port during the winter. The ocean currents will make it difficult for them to move even an inch. Therefore, this should be the last time they set sail." The woman turned her head. "Ryan, how long has the black sail been out?" 2 months and 4 days, the man said without hesitation. "If there is no accident, they will arrive at the port of Clearwater in 3 days." Garcia laughed. "I hope they can bring me enough surprises." Ryan Coben looked at the flamboyant woman in front of him. His heart was filled with emotion. Her long gray hair refracted silvery light under the autumn sun. Her eyes were light green, and the corners of her eyes were long and narrow. When she stared at people, there was an indescribable sense of oppression. After staying at the seaside for a long time, her skin was slightly rough, not as white as the other women of the royal family, but Ryan didn't care. In his eyes, Garcia's temperament was enough to overshadow any beauty. Unlike the group of inbred idiots in Grey Castle, Princess Wimbledon was a real genius. She had the wisdom and pride of an aristocrat, but she didn't scrupulously abide by the rules like an aristocrat. At this point, she was even a bit like a commoner, full of expectations to break the monotony, full of an adventurous spirit. Of course, No commoner would have the same height and vision as her. Even the Duke and the Marquis would appear short-sighted in front of her. She was able to invest all the trade income of the port of Clearwater into the construction of the fleet, without leaving a single coin in her own treasury. Just this point alone was something that the group of misers couldn't compare to. There is no point in hiding these golden dragon in the cabinet. When you don't use it, it's just like a stone. Only when you spend it, can it reflect its own value. The point is, spending it doesn't mean losing it. As long as you use it properly, the return you get will be far more than its own value. Ryan could still clearly remember the words she said to him. It was almost like an epiphany that broke through the fixed ideas that had been formed in his mind for a long time. Compared to the nobles who spend all day counting how much their savings have increased, Ryan felt that this was the demeanor of a ruler. So he followed Garcia to the port of Clearwater without hesitation. But after arriving here, Ryan discovered that the third princess had done far more than that. She not only had ideas but also actions. She formulated the Black Sail plan around this core, and carried it out step by step in an orderly manner. As early as 5 years ago, Garcia's forces had already infiltrated the port of Clearwater, preparing to establish the Black Sail fleet. At that time, Wimbledon III had not yet proposed the battle for the throne. In other words, she was way ahead of all the other heirs. "Come into the house, the wind is getting stronger," said Garcia, tilting her head. Her temporary residence was located at the southernmost point of the port of Clearwater, above Salmon Harbor. This tower-like building was like a watchman stationed on the coast. At the top of the tower was a circular terrace with a wide field of vision, from which one could have a bird's-eye view of the entire harbor and the merchant ships that came and went. Now, after 5 years of operation, the port of Clearwater's trade had begun to take shape. Every 6 months, a 3-masted sailboat would be launched in the dock, and he had also gained the initial trust of the other party. Taking advantage of the third princess's good mood, Ryan hesitantly asked the biggest doubt in his heart for the past few months. "Your Highness, there is one thing I don't understand." He closed the door, isolating himself from the whistling sea wind. "Go ahead," she nodded with a smile. "How come you were able to foresee all of this in advance before the king issued the battle for the throne?" He had also wondered if Wimbledon III had told her in advance, but after careful consideration, he knew that this was impossible. Everyone knew that the second prince was the king's most valued heir. The battle for the throne was set up for him. This could be seen from the second prince's fief, Valencia. But how could she have guessed all of this by herself, and even began to lay out the plan 5 years ago? God above, she was only 18 years old at that time. "Foresee?" She showed a funny look. "Do you think I'm a witch? I don't have that kind of ability to play tricks." But I didn't know that my father would come up with such a rotten idea like the battle for the throne, to pave the way for his precious second son. In fact, what does the battle for the throne have to do with what I've done? No relation?" Ryan suddenly seemed to realize something. He was so surprised that his mouth opened wide. Seeing Ryan Coben's incredulous expression, Garcia smiled. "Do I have to wait for my father to say that I can fight for the throne? Only then will I have the qualifications to fight for it? In the same way, will the one who governs the city the best be able to sit on the throne of Grey Castle? I thought you would understand when you saw the Black Sail plan." "So that's how it is," Ryan murmured. Her fleet was not simply formed for property. This fleet belonging to the third princess, after completing their trade, would change into the Black Sail at a place far away from the port, robbing the merchant ships of other cities or countries. In the same way, the third princess encouraged her people to sail out to sea and participate in the Black Sail plan. She promised any looted property would belong to the owner of the ship, and the port of Clearwater would never collect taxes on this profit. This move brought her a huge amount of wealth, so this time she simply ordered the Black Sail fleet to go straight south, plundering any ship that passed through the Endless Cape, as well as the Southern Sand Nation. But these moves were not just for the sake of money. Garcia did not use the plundered wealth to build the city or expand the land trade. She just put it into the shipyard and continued to build more ships. In these years, she gained a large number of experienced sailors, fierce warriors, and the support of the people. If she couldn't continue to rule, the villains who participated in the plundering would all be sent to the gallows. Will the one who governs the city the best be able to sit on the throne of Grey Castle? No, Ryan now knew, the one who could sit on the throne was the one who had many ships and soldiers, the one who could go up the San Juan River, all the way to the city of Valencia Garcia Wimbledon. Did you know that you would be assigned to the port of Clearwater? This was an accident. It was just a bonus to the deal. Garcia shrugged her shoulders. I originally thought that the church was fooling me. Related to the church? Seeing that the other side didn't continue, Ryan didn't dare to ask. But he knew. Even if Garcia didn't come to the port of Clearwater, this place would still obey her will and continue to move in the direction she wanted. Let's put this aside. She poured herself a cup of black tea. The previous little trick seems to have failed. Ah, yes. Ryan quickly recovered from his thoughts and replied. Only news came from Border Town. The report said that the pill had failed. There was no news from other places. There was no news. It should have been killed by my brothers, which was expected. Originally, it was just a pawn that was casually arranged. It had no effect on the overall situation. It was only used to kill time. But she changed the subject. Other pawns failing is normal, but I didn't expect that even my fourth brother would be safe and sound. To tell you the truth, I am a little disappointed. In the secret letter, Kingfisher said that the pill had indeed been taken, but a failure is a failure. I don't want to listen to your explanation, Garcia interrupted. Not long after the months of the demons, will our lovely prince take refuge in Longsong's stronghold? When the time comes for the invasion of the demonic beasts, I am afraid that the stronghold will be in chaos for a while. You write to her. Tell her to take advantage of this opportunity. I want to see whether the goddess of luck will still stand on the side of my fourth brother. Yes, Your Highness. You can go. Garcia waved her hand, and when Ryan was ready to leave, the third princess called out to him. Ah, yes. I remember that the pill was bought from Master Alchemist Mbize, right? Ryan nodded. Chapter 12. Roland stood in the backyard of the firing room, waiting for the first batch of cement to come out. This brick house was specially designed for cement production. It was about 15 meters long and 4 meters wide. There was a door at the front and back. The difference was that the front door was as wide as possible for people to move materials. The back door was only wide enough for one person, which allowed Anna to sneak into the firing room. For this reason, he also built a wall halfway around the house, surrounding the back half of the firing room, and arranged for the night to guard the entrance and exit. They were all Carter's subordinates. Their loyalty was unquestionable. The production process of cement was very simple. After crushing the limestone into powder, it was mixed with clay and iron powder, then using the dry or wet calcination method to produce clinker, and then grinding it together with gypsum could be used. The raw materials were very common, and iron powder was difficult to produce in large quantities, so it could be left alone. The key was the temperature of the clinker. Roland did not remember the specific temperature needed to burn the cement. Even if he remembered, he had no way to measure and control the temperature. Whether it was an infrared thermometer or a thermocouple thermometer, they were countless times more complicated than cement. He only knew that the temperature was almost close to the melting point of iron, and the calcination process was also a difficulty in producing cement. In the era of undeveloped smelting technology, maintaining the temperature of the blast furnace had always been a problem that troubled everyone. Ordinary open blast furnaces lost a lot of heat, and it was difficult to maintain the furnace temperature above 1,200 degrees. And the reverberatory furnace also needed a high-temperature resistant liner, so he couldn't think of how to make refractory bricks. The traditional blast furnace was even worse. The temperature could reach the standard, but relying on the long and narrow furnace cavity to calcine the cement, he was afraid that after the months of the demons, it would not be able to produce enough cement. Therefore, the firing room designed by Roland did not have any heating measures. He relied on Anna. The artificially crushed small particles of limestone and clay were mixed with water to form a slurry, which was evenly spread in the firing room. Then the knight locked the door, and sent away the handyman. Anna entered from the back door and let the flame roast the slurry on the ground until the iron rods were melted. Roland was a little restless. This was his first step in guarding border town. If he could not produce cement, the plan to build a wall in 3 months would just be empty talk. Without the protection of the city walls, no one would be willing to stay in this ghastly place. Whether it was real history or fictional literature, a stable base was essential if one wanted to farm well. Your Highness, can this thing you're talking about really stick the stones together? Carter Lannis, who was guarding Prince Roland, asked. Although the prince told him that this was the latest research result of the Grey Castle Alchemy Workshop, he was still skeptical. After all, those people had never produced any truly reliable alchemy products. Who knows? That's what they say, Roland said as he spread his hands. In this world, alchemy and astrology were known as the sage arts, and they were very popular in many countries on the continent. The royal family would usually train their own alchemists and astrologers for the purpose of refining secret medicines and predicting fate. For ordinary people, these studies were too advanced, so they would blindly believe them. With this in mind, Roland naturally blamed the source of the cement formula on the alchemy workshop. As for whether the chief knight believed it or not, it didn't matter. The flames coming out of the window gradually extinguished. It seemed that the firing was finished. Roland stood up and drove Carter out of the courtyard, waiting alone in front of the brick house's back door. The iron door creaked open, and Anna came out naked. Roland immediately covered her body with a robe and gave her a glass of water. How is it? The witch's face was covered with dust. Although the dust from the wet cement was low, when it was calcined, the hot air would still bring up dust. For her, who couldn't wear a mask, staying inside for dozens of minutes was obviously not too comfortable. She coughed twice and nodded. The mud has turned into ashes. Roland couldn't wait for the temperature to drop low enough. He wrapped a wet towel around his head, grabbed a shovel, and went through the back door. The hot air instantly surrounded him, making it difficult to breathe, and the skin on his hands was burning. Fortunately, it didn't take too much time to shovel the ashes. Otherwise, staying in this environment for a few minutes would cause high-temperature shock. Is this what you want? After Anna put on the witch suit, she stretched out her head and asked. It looks like it. Roland spread out the powder and felt its residual temperature with his fingers. I'll have to try it to know. What's its use? Building houses, building bridges, repairing roads. There are too many places that can be used. If it succeeds, people's homes will not be afraid of the cold, nor will heavy rain and snow be able to destroy them. He patted the little girl's head with his other hand. It's all thanks to you. Anna lowered her head. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the girl's breathing became faster. In theory, the fired clinker should be ground with gypsum to adjust its hardening time. But at this time there was no need to think so much. After a short rest, Roland shoveled out 2 more shovels, then called Carter, who was standing outside the courtyard, and asked him to prepare the cement mortar according to the ratio of 3 parts of ash powder and 1 part of river sand. The chief knight didn't mind doing some rough work. For him, doing this kind of work was much better than fighting for his highness in Grey Castle or hooking up with noble ladies. Because the raw materials didn't add iron powder, the resulting cement mortar was pale in color, showing a grayish white. Roland poured it on one of the stone bricks, and then buckled the other one on top. The cement solidification time was about 4 hours. Considering the instability of the trial product, he intended to simply wait until tomorrow to see the results. Early the next morning, Roland hurriedly took Carter and Anna to the backyard of the firing room. Opening the door, he noticed that the surface of the cement was in a solidified state, and the 2 stone bricks were tightly joined together. The solidified surface looked bumpy, and part of it was covered with hoarfrost. Roland squatted down, scraped off the hoarfrost produced by the alkalization reaction, and pressed the hardened cement with his fingers. The feeling made him happy. The surface of the cement was hard and hard, completely different from the feeling of the compacted soil. Even if he used his nails to dig hard, he couldn't leave a trace on it. After Carter got the signal from Prince Roland, he first tried to lift the stone bricks, but failed. He kicked them from the side several times, until the joint between the cement and the ground broke. The two stone bricks were still firmly stuck together. Finally, he swung the hilt of his sword and hit them hard, but he could only knock off a small piece of the corner. Is this the effect of cement? Carter immediately realized its effect. It's incredible. Yesterday it could flow like a melted candle, but after only one night it became as hard as a rock. With this thing, we can build a wall as fast as we want. As long as we have enough stones, we can even build a wall around the border within 5 years. What's the use of that? Roland said disapprovingly. No matter how tall the wall is, it can't stop the enemy from inside. I'd rather turn the shabby wooden houses in border town into solid cement houses, so that my people no longer have to worry about falling into a situation of homelessness after a natural disaster. The chief knight was stunned. He really didn't expect that Prince Roland, who had all kinds of bad habits of the aristocracy, would say such a thing. Chapter 13. The cement production was soon on the right track. In order to give Anna enough rest, the firing room only started every 2 to 3 days. Before calcination, more raw materials were prepared as much as possible. For this reason, Roland once again issued a recruitment order, doubling the number of gravel workers. But he also knew that he could not always rely on Anna to do these things. Working in a dusty environment for a long time would cause people to get silicosis, coupled with the future expansion of the production scale. One Anna was far from enough to meet the demand. Witches should not be used as consumables, but as an engine to promote the development of civilization. Although Roland understood this in his heart, he could only put all his energy into the construction of the city wall. If he could not stop the demonic beasts, then everything would be useless. The foundation of the city wall connecting the North Slope Mountain and the Redwater River had already begun to be excavated. According to the practice before he crossed over, as the project leader, in front of a crowd of stunned onlookers, he personally dug out the first shovel of soil. He thought that after the cement problem was solved, building a city wall would be easy, but when he actually did it, he found that he did not know anything about engineering. How deep should the foundation be dug? How wide should it be? How to solve the uneven location? How to ensure that it was more than 600 meters long and built in a straight line? He had seen a group of young men using instruments and rulers when the municipal road was being built. It seemed to be called a theodolite and a level, right? But here there was nothing. As a mechanical drawing dog, although Roland and his neighbor, the civil engineering dog, were known as the two engineering dogs, the content of their studies was far different, and the hired clay craftsmen had not participated in the construction of large-scale projects. It could be said that they were inferior to him. Therefore, after the construction of the city wall started, the progress was very slow, and only half a shallow trench was dug in a week. Once the project was out of control, it was difficult to say what the final product would look like. For example, this shallow trench was not so much the foundation of the city wall, but it was more appropriate to say that it was a drainage ditch. Although Roland had roughly measured the width of the trench during the excavation, the width was obviously out of shape, becoming narrower and narrower. Looking at it from afar, it looked like a small snake twisting and turning. Even so, Roland was not willing to stop. In the spirit of digging as much as he could, as long as the firing room was not working, he would stay at the foot of the North Slope Mountain all day, adjusting the extension direction of the foundation pit with his naked eye, and slowly pushing forward. At the same time, he doubled the remuneration for the stonemasons on the recruitment order. Fortunately, this embarrassment did not last long. When Roland was in the firing room preparing to calcine the 6th batch of cement, Minister Barov reported that there was a stonemason who responded to the recruitment. He also said that he had been in the Grey Castle Mason Guild and had been brought to the courtyard to wait for an audience. He was overjoyed when he thought about it. The Grey Castle Mason Guild was a famous organization in his memory. Even Prince Roland had heard of them. Although it seemed that they were disbanded because of a construction accident, how could there be no accidents in this line of work? Bring him in. Roland nodded, pretending to be calm. At first, he wanted to tell Anna to stay away, but then he gave up. There were more than 2,000 people in Border Town, but not many of them had seen the true face of a witch. Moreover, Anna's current appearance was completely different from before, when she was hell-bent on seeking death. Coupled with her strange clothes, it was estimated that even if they had seen her, they would not be able to recognize her. When the knight brought Car van Bait into the courtyard, he felt uneasy. He intended to tell His Highness that this season was not suitable for large-scale projects, and after gaining His Highness' trust, he would slowly change his opinion of the witches. But it was rumored that His Highness had always acted without scruples. What if his advice was counterproductive? He bowed in confusion, but when he raised his head, he was stunned. The girl beside His Highness looked so familiar. It made him feel like he was dreaming. Car rubbed his eyes, looked again, and couldn't help but shout, "Anna!" Damn, Roland's heart screamed. This is too much of a coincidence. How can a random craftsman be able to recruit a witch's neighbor? It can be seen that the other side was absolutely familiar with Anna. Otherwise it would be impossible for him to recognize her in such a short time. He turned to look at Carter Lannis. The chief knight understood tacitly, and immediately pulled the door bolt, blocking the only exit. "Old teacher?" Anna's reaction made Roland unable to recover for a moment. "What, teacher? It's really you, Anna. Car only felt his eyes warm, and then something flowed down. He knelt on the ground powerlessly, and kept repeating, I'm sorry. Great. After a while, Car van Bait calmed down. He slowly stood up, and once again bowed to Roland. "I'm very sorry, Your Highness. I forgot myself." "What the hell is going on? Aren't you a stonemason?" "I used to be," Car answered smoothly after putting down the burden in his heart. His Royal Highness didn't kill Anna. The one who was hanged on the execution ground was a substitute. After realizing this, he already knew what he had to do. Although he didn't know why the other side wanted to save a witch, but in any case, even if His Royal Highness wanted to bring her into the palace, it would still be much better than sending her to the gallows. This at least showed that His Royal Highness wasn't afraid of the rumors that witches were the incarnations of the devil. He described in detail his experience from Grey Castle to Border Town, including the opening of a school here, and the discovery that his student Nana Pine had also become a witch. Finally, he begged His Royal Highness to also hide Nana in the palace, so as to avoid being exposed and persecuted. After listening to him, Anna, who was standing to the side, had a face full of desire to plead for Nana. But in the end, she didn't say a word. Another new witch. This was really great news. But he seemed to have heard the surname Pine before. Roland called the assistant minister and whispered to him. Only then did he know that it was the surname of a small noble family in Border Town. "You can bring her to see me. If she really is a witch, I promise that she won't come to any harm," Roland promised. "But I can't take her away from the Pine family, especially if she hasn't been threatened by her family. In addition, I didn't save Anna for what you think." He thought for a moment, then decided that it would be better to make it clear. "I need her help. Compared to the nonsense of the devil, I believe that the power of a witch has nothing to do with good or evil, and can be controlled. So whether it's Anna, Nana, or any other witch, as long as they haven't done anything illegal, I won't consider them guilty. Next, let's talk about business. Did you participate in the construction of the walls of Grey Castle?" The prince changed the topic back to the construction. "Yes." Car nodded. Although His Royal Highness didn't accept Nana as he had thought, and the fact that he needed a witch's help was confusing, but in the end, he was willing to protect Nana's safety, which was enough. Chapter 14. Your Royal Highness, how high and how wide do you plan to build this wall? At least 15 feet high and 6 feet wide, allowing 4 people to walk side by side. Roland secretly nodded. A professional is really different. First ask the technical parameters, and then determine the construction plan. So it needs to be a deep trench to stabilize the upper part of the wall. And if the top is 6 feet wide and the wall is 15 feet high, the width of the lower part will at least double, Car quickly replied. In this way, digging the trench will consume a lot of manpower. Your Royal Highness, If you can give me 150 people, I should be able to dig this trench before the arrival of the months of the demons. A ditch can't stop the demonic beasts, Roland said noncommittally. That's right. If the upper part of the wall is built with stone, it will take 3 years. If it is only to stop the demonic beasts, the wall doesn't need to be so high. About 12 feet is enough. The width can also be reduced by a third, reducing the base to 6 feet. Digging the trench and building the wall at the same time, the number of people will increase by 200. In this way, I can finish it before the arrival of the months of the demons next year. Carr paused, then said, Please forgive me, Your Royal Highness, but now is not a good time to start work. If the wall is not built in time, even if the trench is dug, after a whole winter of rain and snow, it will lose its original function. In that case, you will have to spend more time and manpower to clean up the softened trench and deepen the excavation depth. If, according to what you said, the wall is built 12 feet high and 4 feet wide, how long will it take to dig the trench? It should take a month and a half, Carr replied. Then do it according to this plan, digging the trench and building the wall at the same time, before the arrival of the months of the demons. Roland waved his hand to interrupt what Carr wanted to say. I know what you are worried about. First look at this, the latest work from the Grey Castle Alchemy Workshop. He naturally did not have time to glue the stone bricks again to show the stonemason, so he just pulled out the 2 pieces he had glued before and showed them. Fortunately, almost no one dared to question the prince's words. When Carr heard that this alchemy adhesive known as cement could turn from liquid to solid during the day and night, and produce an extremely strong adhesive force, an expression of disbelief and shock appeared on his face. Having devoted the first half of his life to the Mason Guild, he naturally realized how great this invention was. In addition to being able to bond stones, it could also be shaped at will. Didn't this mean that he didn't need to cut and polish the second time, and he could directly have any shape of the stone? If the time-consuming and laborious process could be abandoned, the construction speed of any building would be raised to a whole new level. Just this point alone was enough to excite people. Roland looked at the other party's expression with satisfaction and asked again, How about it? Do you think 3 months is enough? Carr Van Bate's voice trembled a little. If what you said is right. No, I mean if the Alchemy Workshop's description of this thing is correct, I am willing to give it a try. Very well. I will have someone write you a detailed information on how to use the cement. If there is anything else you need, you can talk to my assistant minister, Roland said with a smile. Mr. Carr, now you are a member of the administrative office. It was the next afternoon that Roland saw Nana in person. The little girl looked at Anna blankly, clutching the corner of her clothes for a long time before saying, Am I already dead? When he saw her for the first time, Roland had to admit that the power of witches not only gave them magical abilities, but also changed their appearance and temperament to a certain extent. She and Anna were completely different types, but they both had a unique charm. This feeling had nothing to do with age, nor did it have anything to do with living conditions. Even when Anna was waiting for her death in prison, the radiance she emitted was still the same. Looking through all his memories, whether it was a street prostitute in Grey Castle, or a well-educated noble lady, he had never had such a feeling. If he had to describe it, putting them together with the witches was like seeing colorful characters in a black and white photo. Carr Van Bate, who brought her here, tactfully excused himself, leaving only Roland, Anna, and Nana in the palace garden. You are not dead, and Anna is also alive and well, Roland said while holding back his laughter. I am the 4th Prince Roland Wimbledon, and you are. I am Nana Pine, the little girl said, her expression coming back to life when she heard that she was not dead. She ran straight to Anna's side and chattered with her, completely ignoring Roland's identity as the Prince of Grey Castle. Roland naturally would not argue with a 14 or 15-year-old girl. He sat down by the round table, poured himself a glass of ale, and enjoyed the daily life of the 2 witches. Anna was obviously not used to the other party's familiarity. She would only respond once Nana said a dozen words. Then again, Anna was only 17 years old, but she already had the feeling of a big sister. Roland could not help but think, When she grew up, how outstanding would she become? When Nana gradually slowed down, he coughed twice and opened his mouth to ask, Miss Pine, I heard from your teacher that you have awakened as a witch. Compared to the majority of people who said that they had fallen to become a witch, Roland preferred the word awakened. Chapter 15. Seeing the knight leave, Roland returned to the table. You can cure small animals, why do you still think witches are evil? My teacher said that witches can do things that ordinary people can't. Sometimes they don't seem bad, but it's a trap set by the devil to lure more people. The girl's voice lowered. I really haven't seen the devil, I swear. Of course you haven't seen it, it's just the church's lies. Your teacher was also one of the deceived people, Roland comforted. The church deceives people? Nana opened her mouth wide. Why? Roland shook his head and didn't explain. Even if he said it, they wouldn't be able to understand. When civilization has not developed to a certain extent, this kind of strange thing will always happen. Even without the motivation of interests, people will automatically attribute natural disasters, man-made disasters, or incomprehensible phenomena to the imaginary people behind the scenes. As far as history is concerned, most of the blame is borne by women. But in this world, witches have real power of unknown origin, so it is easier for them to become the church's target. Think about it, it is impossible for the church to ignore this kind of phenomenon. They can either confer all witches as saintesses, saying that this is a gift from God, or hunt witches, saying that they are the devil's spokesman. However, once they choose the former, the prestige of the monotheistic religion will be greatly affected, because the appearance of witches has nothing to do with the church. If the church that believes in other gods also confer witches as saintesses, then everyone is the chosen one. Then whose God is the only true God? The premise for the coexistence of polytheistic religions is that the gods really exist and can restrict each other. Since God doesn't exist, they are all symbols made up by words, so why should they share this world? Therefore, any monotheistic religion will claim that they believe in the true God. For the heathens, there is only one way to go, and that is to destroy the body. Similarly, they can only choose the latter, and spare no effort to attack witches. This has nothing to do with preference, it is only for the benefit. There is a live chicken in the castle kitchen, and when the knight came with its wings, it was still kicking. What happened next left Nana dumbfounded. Roland took out a silver knife from his waist, and gave it to the knight to stab the chicken. After stabbing it, it would ask Nana to come up and heal it. After healing it, it would change the method to continue, and so on. When the chicken that had been tormented for a long time finally died, Roland had a general understanding of Nana's ability. She could restore damaged parts including cuts, fractures and bruises. If a part was completely missing, such as a chicken claw that had been cut off, she would not be able to grow a new claw. However, by reattaching the broken claw and using his ability, he could make the fracture as good as new. In the end, she had no way to reverse life and death. Once the chicken died, her treatment would be ineffective. During the entire treatment process, Roland did not see the sticky water she described. She simply placed her hand on the chicken's wound, and the wound healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. After a series of experiments, Nana's physical consumption was not large. At least she was not sweating like Anna when she was training. The only one who was dissatisfied was Nana herself. She felt that treating the chicken like this was too much. So much so that she kept staring at Roland with a pout, until the end of the experiment. Well, don't stare, come eat something. Roland saw this and had to use the summon afternoon tea trick to divert her attention. This trick was tried and tested with Anna. He thought that few girls of her age could resist the temptation of delicious desserts. But it turned out that Nana's performance in front of the exquisite pastries was not much better than the former. After eating the pastries, Roland asked someone to send Nana away. Anna asked puzzledly, "Why didn't you keep her? She is a witch like me, right?" She still has a family, and her family has not yet found out that she is a witch. Anna whispered, "It's just a matter of time." "Yes, it's just a matter of time," Roland sighed. "So a little later is a little later." Do you miss your father? She shook her head. Her eyes, as calm as the surface of a lake, did not have a trace of ripple. It seemed that being betrayed by her father had completely disappointed her. But even if she had no family, she still had friends. Nana will come often. In fact, I plan to let her come here every 2 days to practice her ability. Hearing this, she blinked her eyes and nodded quickly. Do you want to be like her, go back to Teacher Carr's academy and study with other children? Anna did not answer, but he felt that he had heard the voice in her heart. This situation will not last long. As long as I am here, you will eventually be able to live like ordinary people. No one will catch you and send you to the gallows. This day will come, Roland said word by word. I promise. Since Carr Van Bate took over the project, Prince Roland suddenly became idle. Every afternoon he stayed in the castle garden, accompanying Anna or Nana to practice. Now Anna did not need to prepare extra clothes for training. Even if each of her fingers jumped up in flames, she could skillfully operate them, and would not accidentally ignite her witch's hat like before. Nana also changed into a witch's uniform, and although she was reluctant to practice, for the sake of afternoon tea, she still pursed her lips and obediently did it. Watching the two witches wandering in the yard, Roland's wicked interest was greatly satisfied. Chapter 16. The fire in the fireplace was burning brightly, dispelling the chill that seeped through the cracks in the doors and windows. On the top of the fireplace hung a deer head with a huge horn. Under the light of the fire, the reflection of the horn on the wall behind him looked like a huge claw. Opposite him was a long dark red wooden table, which was covered with parchment scrolls and books, most of which were administrative orders waiting to be signed. Usually, Roland handled official business here. Since the transformation of the third floor of the castle into an office, he gradually fell in love with it. Through the floor-to-ceiling window behind him, he could see the town extending in front of him, and at the end of it was an endless mountain range. It was the impassable mountain range that almost pierced through the continent, separating the kingdom of Grey Castle and the barbarian land on the east and west sides. The North Slope Mountain was just a branch of the impassable mountain range. At his feet, he could see the garden surrounded by a wooden fence. The wooden shed used for Anna's training had been demolished, and the brick pool had been turned into a long table for the convenience of placing tableware during afternoon tea. If the weather was good, he would go down to bask in the sun, or lie down on the custom-made rocking chair to take a nap. Although the castle was not big, it could still be regarded as a medium-sized villa with an independent garden. In his previous life, wanting to sit in a real stone castle was almost a fantasy. Just to visit it, he had to first pay for the entrance fee. But now, he not only owned this castle but also a town. Your Highness, recently the recruitment of craftsmen and handymen has cost a lot of money, all of which came out of your pocket. If this continues, I'm afraid we won't be able to last until next spring. Bearov held a stack of parchment and reported the recent financial situation to Roland. The original income and expenditure of Border Town was very simple. One line was the trade of ore and gems. This line was monopolized by Longsong Stronghold. They exchanged the output of the North Slope mine for wheat or bread. There was no tax in the middle, and the Stronghold sent people to preside over the resource exchange. In layman's terms, the North Slope mine was a joint stock project of the great nobles of Longsong Stronghold. Those nobles stationed in Border Town could be regarded as supervisors sent by the shareholders. Most of their fiefs were east of Longsong Stronghold, and they only came here temporarily. Every year, the number of people who came was different. In fact, Border Town had a history of less than 30 years, compared to Longsong Stronghold, which had a history of nearly 200 years. It was simply a newborn baby. Originally, the Duke of Ryan had only intended to establish an outpost here, to provide an early warning against the invasion of the demonic beasts. But unexpectedly, the wasteland reclaimers found rich mineral resources in the North Slope Mountains, so they simply set up a town here, and named it Border Town. In a sense, it was the North Slope mine that created the town. In order to prevent the nobles from sending their own people to mine, the Duke did not accept the suggestion of the nobles to send their own people to mine. Instead, he hired the local residents, refugees, and even criminals to be the miners. The ore produced was distributed according to the proportion of resources invested by the nobles. The fortress only needed to provide the employer with a year's worth of rations and a small commission. The remuneration was fixed and would not change according to the mine's output. Border Town had more than 2,000 residents, and more than half of them worked in the mining area. The other line was the town's other industries, such as blacksmiths, taverns, textiles, and so on. Border Town's meager tax revenue mainly came from here, so it was difficult to have much money left over in a year. The previous lord did not take this barren land seriously. Since Roland was sent here by the king of Grey Castle, he simply stayed in Longsong's stronghold. Therefore, if Roland wanted to hire people to build the wall, he could only pay from his own pocket. If it was the former fourth prince, he would certainly not be willing. But for Roland, as long as he could gain a foothold in Border Town, it was worth it to spend all of his wealth. Anyway, the ore trade would no longer be settled with rations. If it was settled with currency, the investment would simply be a drizzle. The only problem was whether Longsong's stronghold was willing to give up its monopoly and carry out normal trade with Border Town. This was quite like snatching food from a tiger's mouth. But according to the list of data provided by Barov, due to the low efficiency of mining and the inconvenience of transportation, in fact, the annual output of ore from the mine was only a little more than 1,000 golden dragon coins. For the entire revenue of Longsong's stronghold, it was only a drop in the bucket. The only ones whose interests would suffer were the nobles who had invested in the mine. For the long-term development of Border Town, this line of trade must be taken back. In Roland's heart, it was clear that even if the investments of those people had been fully recovered more than 10 years ago, they would not easily let go. Even a small mosquito was meat, not to mention this kind of good thing, where they could just lie down and make money. He was willing to give the previous investors a certain discount in compensation, such as buying at half price and so on. But hauling back a ship of, or for only half a ship of food, this kind of thing was not allowed to happen again. While Roland was staring at the list, Barov was also looking at him. In the past 3 months, or to be exact, in the last month, there had been some indescribable changes in the fourth prince. Outsiders might not be clear, but he followed the prince every day. This kind of change could not be hidden from him. As early as in Grey Castle, he had heard of the notoriety of the fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, going his own way, acting unscrupulously, without any aristocratic demeanor, and so on. In short, he did not make big mistakes, but continued to make small mistakes, and was far worse than his 2 brothers. When he had been sent here by His Majesty, he had been full of disappointment. If not for His Majesty's promise to appoint him as the official Minister of Finance after the end of the fight for the throne, he really wanted to quit. In the first 2 months of his arrival in Border Town, the fourth prince, as always, showed extremely naive behavior and offended all the local nobles. Fortunately, the size of the town itself was very small. Even if all the administrative positions were vacant, he and the dozen or so civil servants he had brought with him could fill them. After that, some things became different. When exactly did the changes start? He thought probably from the time he saved the witch. Barov did not doubt the possibility of the devil's possession, or that the prince himself was controlled by another hidden witch. But the possibility of this was very small. If the devil and the witch had such ability, why would they look for the fourth prince? Wouldn't it be better to directly control His Majesty or the Pope? Another thing that dispelled his doubts was that he had seen the prince hold the god's locket of retribution. This thing was the church's trump card against witches. Any demonic power would collapse in front of the god's locket of retribution, but Roland directly held it. In other words, if he was not the fourth prince, but the devil king who did not even need to fear the god's power, would it still be necessary to expose him? Saving his own life was the first priority. The prince's style was still going his own way, acting unscrupulously, but the two gave him a different feeling. No bear of thought, it should be the opposite. The biggest difference should be the purpose. He noticed that Roland was planning something, and in order to achieve his goal, he must use some means that ordinary people could not understand. Just like how he tried to convince himself why he had to save the witch, perhaps the plan was not mature and full of loopholes. But the prince was indeed moving forward with the plan, and he was convinced of the results. This was the most confusing part. The throne could be born from either of the Roland siblings, but it would never be the fourth prince himself. He should be very clear about this. How could he talk about development in a small place like Border Town? Even the gods couldn't do it. In the end, what kind of crazy plan did Roland come up with? So crazy that he could make a small town built outside the border defense line develop better than Valencia? And make me completely believe that this plan would succeed? If it was just the delusion of a madman, then it would be fine. But Roland's vigorous construction of the wall showed that it did not seem to be the case. He really intended to be stationed here. And with the alchemy product cement, he built a wall that was almost impossible according to common sense. Chapter 17. This place is still so broken. Stronghold Ambassador Perrault stepped out of the cabin and was greeted by the smell of rotten wood. The surrounding air was damp and oppressive, making people feel uncomfortable. He sniffed and raised his head. The sky was gray, and it seemed that a heavy rain was brewing. The last time you came here was a year ago. The assistant attentively put a wool coat on the ambassador. There is nothing here except stones. It was a year and a half ago, Perrault corrected. His Excellency the Duke will send a different person every season. The last time I came to Border Town was in the summer. And in addition to stones, there are all kinds of good furs and… What? The assistant showed a blank face. Perrault shook his head and did not answer. He crossed the ship's side and stepped on the mossy dock, the planks under his feet creaking. In a few more years he thought this dock will fall to pieces. Border Town not only has stones, but also furs and even land. But it was meaningless to say this. The assistant was just an unknown clerk in City Hall. He simply could not see this. Between Border Town and Longsong Stronghold was a large area of uncultivated land. One side was the impassable mountain range. The other side was the Redwater River, just like a long and narrow corridor. As the outpost of Longsong Stronghold, if it assumed the responsibility of the line of defense, a large area of land in the middle would fall into the hands of Longsong Stronghold. They were not cultivated, so they could be planted many times without fallow. And with the natural barriers on both sides, it would not take much effort to eat them. This could solve a series of problems caused by the increasing population of Longsong Stronghold, and Border Town would become a part of Longsong Stronghold, instead of being separated into two independent territories like it was now. The only drawback was that it needed 3 to 5 years of operation and a large amount of upfront investment. Unfortunately, when it came to investment foresight, most nobles were not as good as a bad businessman. Hey, why is the yard empty? The assistant pointed to an empty space in the distance and said, Shouldn't they have prepared the ore? Perrault sighed softly. Let's go to the castle to see His Highness. Wait. Mr. Ambassador, don't you wait for their reception team? He didn't know if there were any, he thought, but he didn't say it out loud. Let's go. The stables are just ahead. Now, the trouble of being divided into two independent territories had obviously come. The king's decree for the throne had thrown the fourth prince into this desolate place. What would a normal noble or royal disciple do? Of course, it was to take everything here for himself. Exchanging ores and jewels for food and bread? The prince probably only had eyes for the golden dragon. If it were him, he would do the same. No one would be willing to see their territory's output being exchanged at such a low price. Moreover, the prince didn't necessarily have to go to the Longsong Stronghold. Most of the people in the family had forgotten the fact that the Redwater River didn't only pass through the Longsong Stronghold. He could sell the ores to Willow Town, Fallen Dragon Ridge, and Redwater City at the market price, and then take the people to these places to take refuge. It was just that the distance was longer. What could Longsong Stronghold do then? Block the river and intercept the prince? That was a blatant defiance of the royal family of Grey Castle. Everyone knew that the fourth prince was not liked by the king, but there was no doubt that he was still the king's blood. The two of them rode the rented horses, slowly moving along the flagstone road by the river. The horses in the stables were old, mixed colors, skinny as firewood. Even though they were walking slowly, their whole bodies trembled. And for these two stupid horses, he had to pay 2 golden dragon as a deposit. "Look, sir, is that the boat from Willow Town?" Hearing the assistant's shout, he looked in the direction pointed by the assistant, and saw a single-masted sailboat with a green leaf and a scimitar flag slowly coming along the river. The hull's waterline was very high, indicating that it was loaded with goods. Perrault nodded expressionlessly, but his heart sank. The other side's action was faster than he had imagined. If the prince had already begun to contact the towns downstream of the Redwater River, he would have one less bargaining chip in his hands. He had originally intended to persuade his father to agree to buy the ores at a price lower than the normal price by 30%, so that he could still make a profit, not to mention the jewels, which after polishing could increase their value by several times. Unfortunately, this monopoly business was not up to him, nor was it up to the Honeysuckle family. There were 6 noble families participating in the mining business in Border Town, and if they didn't get a majority, they couldn't form a decision. But they were slow to react, thinking that the situation was still the same as before, or the output of the mining area was not worth their attention. Anyway, the other 5 families were indifferent, and his father confidently refused him. In fact, they were wrong. The main reason for the low output of the mining area was the barter model. If it became a normal trade, the more they sold, the more they earned, and the ore output was likely to rise to a higher level next year. If they talked about the previous monopoly plan, it was very likely, no, it was definitely impossible to achieve. Perrault thought from the empty dockyard. It could be seen that the prince did not intend to exchange these stones for inferior wheat. He had already contacted other buyers. If he still wanted to control this trade line, the 30% discount was his last bargaining chip. The distance between Willow Town and Border Town increased the cost of ore transportation, and Willow Town had more than one source of ore, so the price they offered was likely to be lower than the market price by half. As for Fallen Dragon Ridge and Redwater Castle, they would only offer a lower price, so that the fourth prince might agree to let Longsong's stronghold monopolize, especially the gem trade. But the problem was, if he signed the contract on his own initiative, would his father agree? What about the other 5 families? Would they think that he was simply surrendering to Border Town, handing over the family's interests? After all, in their eyes, Border Town was still under the control of their own people in Longsong's stronghold, and it was nothing more than a pasture for them to take whatever they wanted. The two slowly crossed to the castle in the southeast corner of the town. It was not the first time for Perrault to come here, but this time, the owner had changed. When the guards saw the ambassador's certificate, they immediately went in to inform the lord. The fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, quickly summoned Perrault. When the two were led into the reception hall, the prince was already waiting in the main seat. "Mr. Ambassador, please sit down." Roland clapped his hands and asked the maid to serve a sumptuous meal. There was a whole roast chicken, a wild boar's leg stewed with mushrooms, bread and butter, and a large bowl of vegetable soup. Obviously, in this border area, the personal enjoyment of the royal children was not the slightest bit affected. Perrault naturally would not be polite. From Longsong's stronghold to Border Town by water, even if the wind was favorable, it would still take 2 days. If it was a multi-masted cargo ship, it would be even slower. It would take 3 to 5 days. There was no kitchen on the ship, so they generally ate their own dried meat strips or wheat cakes. Seeing the steaming dishes, he felt his own saliva surging in his throat. However, many years of aristocratic cultivation allowed him to maintain perfect dining etiquette. On the contrary, His Highness' table manners were much worse, especially when it came to the use of knives and forks. Perrault noticed that in addition to the knife used by the fourth prince when cutting meat, all other actions were completed with a pair of small wooden sticks. And it seemed that, 2 wooden sticks were much more convenient than forks. What do you think? When the meal was almost over, Roland suddenly asked. A what? The ambassador did not come back to his senses for a moment. This. The other side shook the wooden stick in his hand, and without waiting for Perrault to answer, he said directly, an iron fork for most people is a luxury, not to mention a silver fork. But if you use your hands to eat, it is easy to eat dirty things together with it. You know that diseases come from the mouth, don't you? The ambassador did not know how to answer. He did not quite understand the meaning of diseases come from the mouth, but according to the previous sentence, it probably meant that if dirty things stuck to the food, it would be easy to get sick. But everyone lived like this, and he did not see anyone die because of this disease. A pair of oak sticks, in the concealing forest, there are as many as you want, it is clean and easy to get. I intend to promote this in the town. The prince took a sip of wine. Of course, now my people have almost no meat to eat, but it will slowly get better. Chapter 18. Although he was cursing, the banquet still needed to be eaten. The atmosphere of the dinner was quite harmonious. The fourth prince did not talk about the ore, so it was not convenient for him to say anything. When the prince ordered the maid to change the dessert, Perrault tentatively said, Your Royal Highness, according to the past practice, today should be the day to deliver the ore, but I did not see any ore in the dockyard. Roland put down the small stick in his hand and nodded. Unfortunately, a while ago the North Slope mine collapsed, and for the past month my people have been trying to restore production. However, the gravel from the collapse has not been cleaned up, and according to this progress, I am afraid the mining operation will be delayed until next year. Collapse? Perrault froze for a moment. Such a coincidence? But he quickly realized that the other side did not need to lie to him. Otherwise, he would have gone to the North Slope mine to see clearly. Telling such an obvious lie was tantamount to slapping his own face. Then what about the last 2 months? Not too much. According to the usual practice, such a small amount of stone cannot support my people. Roland emphasized the word usual. Mr. Ambassador, you should remember the months of demons 2 years ago, right? Perrault certainly remembered. It lasted for 4 months, and nearly 20% of the people in border town starved to death. The reason was the insatiable greed of the Mayor Renault. The nobles were not without opposition, and some people even asked to punish Renault afterwards. But in the end, this incident was left unsettled, just because he was the husband of the Duke's second daughter. Now that the prince mentioned this matter, Perrault's heart raised a bad feeling. This time it is even worse, Roland sighed. If the previous delivery method is followed, I am afraid we can only exchange for 2 months of wheat. My people cannot survive the winter, sir. The old way of trade must be abolished. Perrault opened his mouth, but did not know how to refute. He was not a professional diplomat. In the face of such a good reason, he really could not find a problem, so he had to delay. Your Royal Highness, I express my regret for this matter. This time there will not be a repeat of the previous tragedy. I will let the 6 families jointly lend a month of food. Your people can wait until the next year to restore production and slowly repay. If I sell to Willowtown, I don't have to repay slowly. But, no buts, Roland interrupted. They are willing to use the Golden Dragon to buy stones, and at the same time sell wheat, cheese, bread, honey at the market price. Anything that can be bought with the Golden Dragon they will sell. Taking a step back, Mr. Ambassador, even if you were willing to lend them a month's worth of food, would the other 5 families agree with your decision? As far as I know, Duke Ryan isn't someone who can reach an agreement easily. Petrov was silent. The fourth prince was right. Not only the other 5 families. He wasn't even sure if he could convince his own father. If he wanted to maintain his monopoly, he had to modify the transaction plan. But he didn't have the right to make the final decision. He was more like a mouthpiece than an ambassador. Maybe the Duke doesn't want anyone to reach an agreement with Border Town? It didn't matter if it was the previous lord or the fourth prince. That's why he appointed different people every season. And these people were never the ones in power in the family. No matter what the result was, he had to try. Thinking of this, Perrault revealed his last card. 30%. He held out 3 fingers. Stronghold will buy ores and raw gemstones at a price lower than the market price by 30%. I think this price should be higher than Willowtown's, Your Highness. Roland spread his hands. It's indeed higher, but it's still the same old problem. Can your words become the unanimous decision of the 6 families? Tomorrow I will set off back to Longsong Stronghold. After reaching an agreement, I will come back with a new contract. But my people can't wait that long. You should know that it usually takes a long time for the nobles to reach an agreement. Your Highness, cooperating with Longsong Stronghold is a better choice for you and your people. Willowtown is too far away, although we can avoid the months of the demons there. Perrault felt his throat was a little dry. But on the road it's easy to encounter danger. My God, what am I doing? His heart was pounding. Am I threatening a prince? Ha 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 ha. Unexpectedly, Roland didn't fly into a rage but laughed. Mr. Ambassador, you seem to be mistaken about something. I don't want to go to Willowtown. You mean? Of course I don't want to go to Longsong Stronghold. Roland looked at the ambassador with a playful look. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, Perrault doubted whether his ears were playing tricks on him. Fortunately, the prince didn't let this strange silence continue. He went on to explain. This winter, I will stay in Border Town. Border Town will become the new border of the Grey Castle Kingdom. Don't be so surprised, my friend. This is not nonsense. Later I can take you to see the newly built wall, at the foot of the North Slope Mountain. City wall? Yes, connecting the North Slope and the Redwater River, 12 feet high and 4 feet wide stone wall. With this, we can defeat the demonic beasts in Border Town. Perrault felt that his brain wasn't enough. Last season when the ambassador went back, he didn't mention anything about the wall. No, at that time the Lord of Border Town was still a person of Longsong Stronghold. How could he send limited manpower to build this? In other words, as soon as the 4th prince arrived here, he began to build the wall? Even so, it has only been 3 months. What can be built in such a short time? Wait, what did His Royal Highness just say? 12 feet high, 4 feet wide, and connecting the North Slope and the Redwater River? Perrault estimated in his heart. Such a scale of the wall would take several years to complete. First of all, he didn't have enough stonemasons to cut the stone. Border Town wasn't Grey Castle. Most of the people living here could only do manual labor. Before he could digest this news, Roland's next words also shocked him. As for the sale of ore, starting next year, I am willing to reduce the price to 50%, sir. But not all of it will be sold to Longsong Stronghold. Because you don't necessarily need so much ore. I think compared to the low profit of raw ore, you will be more interested in some metal products, such as shovels and so on. At this point, he paused for a moment, seemingly waiting for Perrault to understand the meaning of his words. As for the raw gemstones, they will be auctioned by the highest bidder. Although I also want to wait for the gemstones to be cut, and then buy them at a good price. Unfortunately, Border Town currently doesn't have such ability. Then do you have the ability to build a wall in a few months? Perrault roared in his heart. And what do you mean by not needing so much ore? A mere 1,000 golden dragon stones a year. Even if the output will increase, it will at most double. 2,000 golden dragon stronghold won't be able to eat it? That's too arrogant. He resisted the indignation in his heart, trying to maintain his last courtesy. I will remember what you said, Your Royal Highness. When I go back, I will immediately negotiate with the 6 families. But you said that the wall. I want to see it. Chapter 19. The first rain since the beginning of winter finally fell. And it lasted for 2 days at a time. Roland leaned against his desk, looking at the hazy town outside the window. The rain was rolled up by the wind, hitting the glass one after another, stirring up bursts of ripples. Under the refraction of the ripples, the outline of the town became distorted. The houses and the streets were bent and deformed, no longer as neat as before. Due to the lack of effective drainage measures, The jagged stone road was flooded. From a distance, it looked like many sparkling streams. The distant mountains and forests were obscured by the mist, faintly discernible, just like a maze on earth. If such a scenery was placed in modern times, it would certainly be a tourist attraction. But today, what Roland wanted to see was a steel and concrete jungle. When it rained, the construction of the city wall had to stop, which made his joy of successfully dissuading the stronghold emissary from the day before yesterday fade a bit. You just said that the air around us is composed of many kinds of gases. Is that true? A clear voice interrupted Roland's thoughts. Anna blinked her beautiful blue eyes and asked, "Ahem, Miss Anna, when you call His Highness, you should use honorifics," the chief knight reminded her. "Don't be so particular." Roland turned around. "She is now my student." Taking advantage of the rain, he called the two witches and Carter to listen to his class. Yes, he decided to open a class of popular science. The stonemason Carr's school inspired him. Even a stonemason can open a school, let alone a dignified mechanical engineering dog. Why would there be discrimination? Wasn't it because of ignorance? Universal education in any era was the most effective means to promote the development of civilization. He originally wanted to call the assistant minister, but the other party was busy with government affairs, so he politely declined. For some reason, Roland felt that after winter, Berev was particularly motivated, almost single-handedly taking over the daily management of Border Town. Hearing that there was new knowledge to learn, Anna immediately became radiant. Her eyes seemed to be suffused with light. Nana was very happy to see that she didn't need to treat the various experimental animals. Carter, on the other hand, held an expression that said, "Since I have nothing to do, I might as well accompany you in your nonsense." But not long after the class started, the knight's gaze became unfocused. Nana also looked confused, staring at the words nature and science in a daze. Although Anna didn't seem to understand, she still tried hard to remember everything she heard. Roland had no choice but to pause and let the three of them digest it for a moment. In response to Anna's question, he smiled and nodded. "Of course, although they look the same." "Your Highness, I don't understand. Since they all look the same, how do you know they are different gases?" Carter expressed his doubts. "I can prove it to you." Roland knew that if he were to explain it in words, most people would be confused by these mysterious theories. He decided to excite them with a simple experiment. A candle, a glass cup, a wooden basin, and a bowl of clear lime water. These were the things he had prepared in advance. Although the glass cup at this time was light brown, and not as transparent as the beakers of the later generations, it was still enough. After all, this simple experiment did not require observation of the process of change. Roland had already done it once in advance, and the results of the experiment proved that although there was magic in this world, the rest of the laws of nature were still the same as on Earth. He let Anna light the candle, and then put it in the wooden basin. Combustion consumes a kind of gas, and this gas is closely related to all life. If we stop breathing, we will become like this candle. Pay attention. Roland put the glass cup on the candle, the flame swayed twice and soon went out. "It has exhausted the air, Your Highness. This is not surprising," the chief knight said disapprovingly. "Without air, of course we will die, such as falling into the water." Nana nodded again and again. "So, do you think there is nothing left in the cup?" Roland asked while pouring the lime water into the wooden basin. The water quickly covered the mouth of the cup, and finally stopped at half of the cup. This experiment was so classic that most primary school teachers liked to use it as an introductory experiment for natural interest classes. Roland still remembered the teacher's demonstration and explanation on the table, which gave him a sense of shock, and from then on he embarked on the road of science and engineering. He gently lifted the corner of the cup, and saw a few bubbles instantly drilled out of the mouth of the cup, rising to the surface. Then, the clear lime water became slightly turbid, and a little white suspended matter slowly spread out from the mouth of the cup. If there is nothing in the cup, we will not see the bubbles and the change of the water surface. This means that the air contains at least two different gases. In fact, the candle only consumes a part of the air, and the other part is unable to participate in the combustion. Although it is colorless and odorless like the former, its nature is completely opposite. It seems to be the case. Carter thought for a long time before he understood the relationship between the two. But what is the use of knowing this? If we can obtain the former gas, we can make the flame burn longer. And similarly, if we obtain the latter gas, we can quickly extinguish the flame. Anna suddenly said, "What a genius!" Roland praised in his heart. Although there was a small error, but from the different properties of the gases, she was able to immediately associate the separation and purification of the use. This idea was definitely a genius level. It must be known that she had not received any systematic modern education. Being able to quickly think of this was enough to show that her logical ability was beyond ordinary people. At least far better than his own chief knight. That's right, since human beings learned to use fire, they have been separated from animals, and the origin is just an accident. Perhaps it was the lightning that ignited the trees, or perhaps it was the sparks from the impact of the stones that caused the fire. But if no one noticed this, no one tried to use it, we would still be like beasts, he said patiently. The purpose of this experiment is to tell you that curiosity and thinking are the driving forces of human progress. There are many such potential forces in nature, just waiting for us to discover and use them. After saying this, Carter still had a doubtful expression, and Nana belonged to the type who did not understand, but still felt that it was awesome, her eyes staring straight at Roland. Only Anna lowered her head, as if she was thinking about something. Well, Roland sighed. Indeed, an idea that was too advanced would not bring shock. It would only make people feel confused. The height of their thinking determined that it was impossible for them to understand the power of that kind of power. Only when the real thing was really placed in front of them, they would know how magical the hidden power of nature was. At this time, the kettle hanging on the mantel began to make a quang-quang sound. It was the sound of steam hitting the lid. Ah, the water is boiling. The knight walked over and took out the kettle with a fork. The sound soon stopped. He used a piece of cloth to wrap the handle, and lifted the kettle to fill everyone's cup with water. For example, Roland reached out to hold the cup, feeling the temperature coming from the cup. From the first day of using fire, its principle had already matured. Boiling water. Countless people had seen it and practiced it, but they did not expect that this gentle wisp of water vapor could also contain amazing energy. This driving force would only be grasped by humans after hundreds of years, but in a very short period of time, it had changed human history. Although the principle was simple, it was limited by technical problems, so it was not the first choice of most people for farming. But I am different, he thought. There are still witches in this world. Using magic to fight is just a barbarian's idea. Using magic to create, to replace some of the key technology that inhibits the progress of civilization, is the correct way to use it. After chatting until the sun went down and eating dinner with everyone, Roland returned to his bedroom. In this era, there was no nightlife to speak of. If they did not make people, everyone would go to bed early. He had also considered whether to use his privileges as a prince to recruit a maid to exercise. But in the end, because of his thin skin, he could not bring himself to say it. Just as he lit the candles in the room, he heard several claps behind him, and then someone said, "It was really a unique lesson. I did not expect that His Royal Highness the Fourth Prince is actually a learned person." Chapter 20. Please don't be impulsive, Your Highness. I don't mean to hurt you. I just came here to talk to you. What the hell? Is there anyone who wants to talk to me like this? Roland swallowed his saliva and slowly turned around. Under the threat of the dagger, he could only do as the other person said. Under the dim candlelight, Roland saw the other person. She was sitting on the edge of his bed, her whole body buried under her robe, her head covered by a hood, so he couldn't see her real appearance. The candlelight cast her shadow on the wall behind her, taking up most of the wall. "Who are you?" "I don't have a name. My sisters call me Nightingale." She stood up, pulled up the corner of her robe, bent her knees and half squatted. It was actually a standard noble etiquette. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to you, Your Highness Roland Wimbledon. Gratitude? Roland noticed that the pattern on the other person's robe gave a unique flash under the candlelight, 3 parallel triangles, shaped like an eye pattern. It seemed that he had seen it somewhere before. The pattern on the coin is the Holy Mountain and the Magic Eye. This is the emblem of the Witch Cooperation Association. Barev's words suddenly flashed in his mind. You are a witch. Ha ha ha. She let out a series of chuckles. Your Highness is really knowledgeable. Roland quietly breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the other party admit his identity. It was good that he wasn't an assassin sent by the siblings. You came to this remote town for the witches of the North Slope mine? Although I don't know where you heard the news, it's too late to come now. If I really wanted to hang her, she would already be dead. I know. And if you really did that, I wouldn't just want to talk to you. Nightingale sat back on the bed. The Witch Cooperation Association doesn't like people interfering in secular affairs, especially things related to the royal power. But I don't like to listen to them. Killing a prince for a witch may be too much, but I can still leave a deep impression on you. A naked threat. Roland was relieved. She's alive and well. I know. And besides her there is a little girl called Nana, she said, nodding. I came here a week ago, but I didn't see you. I've seen what you've done, and although I don't quite understand why you don't have the usual malice towards witches, but no matter what, on behalf of the Witch Cooperation Association, I thank you. A week ago, Roland wiped his forehead and said, You saw everything I did? Could it be that this guy had been following him all this time without him noticing? All right, you said that you wanted to talk to me. Don't tell me you're just going to thank me. Aren't you tired of standing and talking to me? She said, pulling down her hood. Come over here. I don't look scary. It won't scare you, Your Highness. Not only was she not ugly, she could even be said to be beautiful. The moment the hood fell, Nightingale's golden curly hair flowed down like a waterfall. Under the candlelight, the golden light slowly spread out. Her nose was high, and her eyes were full of spirit. Unlike Anna and Nana's slightly childish face, her facial features revealed a mature style. Although it was impossible to look at her carefully in the dim light, the well-proportioned shadows on her face were enough to prove her beauty. Roland slowly walked over and sat side by side on the bed. He wasn't attracted by the other person's appearance and put the danger behind him, but simply felt that the other person didn't have any malice. Now you can speak. Sure enough, you're not afraid of me. The woman's voice sounded a little happy. You're different from all the people I've seen. They hate us because they're afraid of us. I can see the fear in their eyes, but you. She couldn't help but reach out her hand and gently stroke Roland's cheek. Only curiosity. Roland awkwardly coughed twice and moved his head away. Hey, don't change the atmosphere so fast. Just a moment ago it was still an assassin's creed. How could it suddenly become an overbearing president? Fortunately, the other person quickly restrained her emotions. I came here to tell you that I want to take away Anna and Nana. No. Roland was startled and directly blurted out. Then he was worried that refusing so bluntly would annoy the other person. So he had to add, they have a good life here. No one can hurt them. Besides, where do you want to take them? There won't be a safer place than here. Take them to the Witch Cooperation Association. That's where they belong. Nightingale didn't turn hostile because of the refusal. She still spoke in a calm tone. The members of the Witch Cooperation Association are their companions. There is no discrimination, no persecution. They also don't need to disguise themselves. Whereas the Witch Cooperation Association, you don't have a fixed foothold, do you? A month ago my guards found your camp in the concealing forest. Their footprints showed that you were heading north. What is there in the north? Only endless mountains. You're right. Now the Witch Cooperation Association is somewhere in the impassable mountain range. It's absolutely safe for witches. Like a wild man spending the winter in the mountains, in the end, where is safe? Is there clean water? Is there enough food? Is there a warm shelter? And the months of the demons is coming. The entire Northwest will become a dangerous place. In the end, what are you thinking? At this point, Roland suddenly paused. Wait a minute. What did Barev say? Witches can only obtain true peace by going to the Holy Mountain. The purpose of the Witch Cooperation Association is to gather witches and find the Holy Mountain together. Hell, don't tell me. You plan to find the Holy Mountain in the impassable mountain range. Please forgive me. I have no comment. Nightingale smiled bitterly, but her expression clearly told Roland that he had guessed correctly. In that case, I will never agree, Roland flatly rejected. In 2 months, the entire outside world will be the world of demonic beasts. Even if we can avoid the humans in the mountains, we can't avoid the demonic beasts. How about this? We can find the Holy Mountain anytime we want. You might as well come to Border Town for the winter and wait until the end of the winter to look for it. This time it was Nightingale's turn to be stunned. The Witch Cooperation Association will come here? You are really an interesting person, she thought for a moment, but eventually shook her head. Your Highness, even if you are not afraid of witches, but your people are. And once we are exposed to the eyes of the public, the claws of the church will soon come to our door. As long as we can smoothly survive the months of the demons with the help of the witches, my people will realize that they are not evil. But before Roland could open his mouth, the other side stopped him. In addition, there is another reason why I want to take them away. Anna will soon be an adult. An adult? Chapter 21. When Nightingale finished, the room returned to silence, leaving only the occasional crackle of the candle. Roland looked serious. He finally had a general understanding of the witches. Most witches awakened during the months of the demons, which was the day when the gates of hell opened. Generally speaking, adulthood was the dividing line for witches. Women who had not awakened after the age of 18 would not be able to become witches again, while those who awakened before the age of 18 would suffer the pain of the demonic bite every year on the day of awakening. This kind of pain was hard to imagine. When Nightingale talked about this part, her voice trembled. According to her personal experience, it was as if something wanted to break out of the body. Every blood vessel and tendon was in unbearable pain. In the end, the skin would ooze blood and the eyes would bulge out of their sockets. If they could endure it, the body would slowly recover after 4 or 5 days of rest. But if they could not, they would die in this torture, and their death would be unbearable. Nightingale had witnessed the death of her companions several times. Their bodies lost the ability to support themselves and turned into a swollen ball of meat. Blood mixed with internal organs spurted out from the body holes, turning into a black mist when it came into contact with the air. Finally, when all that could be spurted out, only a layer of charred skin was left on the ground. This was the evidence that witches were regarded as the incarnation of the devil. Ordinary people who saw this scene would be scared out of their wits. Who would care about the real cause of death? Coupled with the church adding fuel to the fire, claiming that this was the result of believing in the devil, over time, witches became the spokesperson of evil. No matter how outsiders saw it, this kind of torture was real. And it was also the reason why witches generally had a short life. The longer they lived, the more difficult it became, and many people chose to end their lives. The demonic bite at the age of 18 was the most difficult hurdle to overcome. In fact, the magic obtained by witches before was not complete, and only after adulthood, this power would be stabilized. After stabilizing the magic, compared to before, there would be a significant improvement, and even a new branch of ability would be derived. Unfortunately, the process of stabilizing the magic was extremely painful. The strength of the demonic bite exceeded the limit that ordinary people could bear, and many witches would die on the day of adulthood. Roland was silent for a long time after listening to Roland's story, and then he asked in a low voice, "According to the ancient books, witches can only obtain eternal peace in the Holy Mountain, and they won't have to suffer the torture of the demonic bite. Is this true?" No one knows, because the sacred mountain has only appeared in legends. However, if he took them to the Witch Cooperation Association's camp, their chances of survival would be higher. If witches don't have to hide themselves and can live freely, the power of the body devouring will be much weaker than before. Roland's heart was in a mess for a moment. His plan couldn't do without the help of Anna and Nana, but because of his plan, They would have to bear a huge risk. He really couldn't bear it. Finally, he said weakly, Anna is downstairs. I'll call her over. If she's willing, you can take her away. If it's Nana, I won't see her until tomorrow. Thank you for your understanding. I was right about you. Nightingale stood up to express her gratitude. At this time, Anna still hadn't fallen asleep. When Roland went to call her, she was bending over the table copying something. Seeing that it was Roland, she looked a little surprised. When she heard that they were going to the prince's room, Anna didn't say a word and obediently followed him upstairs. When she entered the room and found that there was another person inside, the girl was really startled. Roland took her hand and gave a brief introduction. The three of them sat around a round table. Nightingale repeated what she had said before. In the camp, there are many people like you, and they are all your companions. That's probably the situation, Miss Anna. Although I signed an employment contract with you, in a life-threatening situation, I have to respect your opinion. If you promise, I won't go. Roland was stunned. What did you say? I said I won't go. Anna quickly interrupted Roland's words. I want to stay here. Anna, I didn't lie to you, Nightingale said with a frown. I can feel the magic surging in your body. It's close to maturity. 2 months from now, the months of the demons will be your day of adulthood. The earlier you arrive at the camp, the safer you will be. She didn't pay attention to the other side, but turned her head and looked at Roland. Your Royal Highness, do you remember you asked me whether I wanted to be like Nana, to return to Teacher Carr's academy and study with the other children? Roland nodded. I didn't answer at that time. What you said afterwards, about living like a normal person, I don't care. Anna's voice was calm and natural. I just want to stay by your Royal Highness side, that's all. Roland thought he understood Anna's mind, but now he realized that he didn't understand at all. In the other's eyes, he couldn't read any emotion. It wasn't dependence, it wasn't love. He couldn't see anything, only a bottomless tranquility. He remembered the scene of their first meeting, the same calm expression in her eyes. The difference was, at this moment, her face was full of vitality, like a budding flower. She still wasn't afraid of death, but she no longer looked forward to it. The demonic bite can't kill me, Anna said word by word. I will defeat it. Nightingale closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Well, I know. So will you leave alone? Roland asked. No, I'll stay here. She pulled up her hood and stood up. Anyway, before the end of the months of the demons, the camp won't move. Why? Roland was surprised. Was she going to monitor him for the whole winter? I don't think a fledgling who hasn't experienced adulthood will understand its dangers. I've struggled on the edge of death several times, and I've witnessed the disappearance of my companions. When that day comes, I can help her. Nightingale shrugged. If she doesn't survive, I also have experience in dealing with the aftermath. She went to the door, pulled out her dagger, and once again bowed to Roland, then goodbye. With that, her figure gradually disappeared into the darkness, like a mist, leaving no trace. Is this Nightingale's ability? Roland thought, a silent stealth technique. She's simply a natural assassin. And from the way she threw the dagger, she definitely received relevant training. Is the Witch Cooperation Association also developing its own strength, in addition to accepting people of the same kind? Or did she already master these skills before she was recruited into the Witch Cooperation Association? There was too little information about this organization, and Roland couldn't find any useful information in his memory. But he had a hunch that he would definitely meet with this organization again, as long as he insisted on walking the path of witches farming. It's getting late, you should go back to sleep, Roland said, patting the girl's head. To his surprise, Anna pushed his hand away and walked out of the room without saying a word. After closing the door, the light was isolated behind her, and the shadow enveloped her. She gently leaned against the door, and her eyes, which were like a lake, were no longer calm. She raised her head, put her arm in front of her face, and finally whispered in a barely audible voice. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.